Chapter 2000. Yuan Jianqing thought that the matter of the heaven and earth had been settled, so he brought Wu Shangqiu, his wife, and his children back to the mountain and sea realm. Because he needed to report to Lu Yeni and return to the Xianyuan heaven, he gave Wu Shangqiu a flying boat and told him to settle down with his family. He also told him not to wander around after settling down, and to wait for Elder Quan to call him. Wu Shangqiu agreed, and after Yuan Jianqing left, he drove the flying boat back to his cave. The flying boat he was riding on was the one Yuan Jianqing had used in the past. It had been meticulously refined by the cultivators of the Baoyang courtyard. Even in the Qinsang school, apart from the true disciples, very few people could use it. When people saw it, they thought that it was an elder from the sect, and they all moved to the side to show their respect. When Wu Shangqiu saw this, he couldn't help but look a little unnatural. At this time, he could only choose not to come out to avoid more awkwardness. After a while, he hurriedly removed the cover on the top of the flying boat to avoid more misunderstandings. When Lu Qiuhua saw this, she pursed her lips and smiled mischievously. "Husband, just now you're so awe-inspiring." Wu Shangqiu laughed at himself. "Don't make fun of me, madam. Your husband is just a fox borrowing the tiger's might for once." The bright nether heavenly lake wasn't just a single sky-pillar heavenly lake. It was surrounded by countless lakes and mountains. Aside from those who were cultivating outside, there were at least 100,000 disciples who lived here. Every single one of them had an abode of their own, and this was true even for the lower-level disciples. Because the sect's territory was too vast, the Dark Azure sect usually used the transportation altars scattered all over the place, followed by the flying boats and cloud rafts. As a junior disciple of the Bright Serenity sect, Wu Shangqiu used to live on a remote mountain. Now that he had reached the mystic light realm, he could fly around freely. Originally, he could have exchanged for a flying mountain in the sky as his cave, but he thought that he would definitely be punished. Even if he could keep his life, he most likely wouldn't be able to cultivate for the rest of his life. However, in order not to worry his family, he did not reveal any abnormalities on the surface. He even comforted Lu Qiuhua, telling her not to worry about him. Wu Shangqiu was afraid that he wouldn't have many opportunities to accompany his family in the future, so he purposely took a big detour along the way so that his wife and children could enjoy the scenery around them. Along the way, Nan hugged her mother's neck and timidly looked around. Zhong, on the other hand, had brought a few high stools out of nowhere. She stacked them up and stood on them. Leaning on the side of the azure glazed boat, she boldly stuck her head out and looked at the novel sceneries outside. The mountains and palaces floating in the sky, as well as the cranes and birds flying in the sky, all of them attracted him. Every time he saw a flock of them, he would clap his hands and let out a cheer. Lu Qiuhua was also dazzled by what she saw. After listening to Wu Shangqiu's explanation, she knew that what she saw in front of her was just a drop in the ocean of the sect. Thus, she was different from the two children. At this moment, other than anticipation, her heart was filled with deep reverence. At this moment, faint sounds of laughter came from the sky. Zhong curiously looked over and saw a few children around his age riding on parrots with beautiful feathers. Sometimes, they swooped down and flew in the sky, and sometimes, they flew around in circles. They were chasing and playing in the gaps between the waterfalls. He couldn't help but reveal an envious and yearning expression. Pointing in that direction, he turned around and said, "Father, can Zhong have a big bird?" Wu Shangqiu patted his head and smiled. "Since Zhong wants it, father will get one for you when we get back." He could see that those children should be the disciples of the Blue Feather Pavilion's Han clan. He couldn't get such a good mount, but before he went to the Wei Ming world, he had received a reward, so it wasn't difficult to get an ordinary spirit bird. Zhong couldn't help but cheer loudly, and the little white fox on his head also cried out a few times. At this moment, a long-bearded Taoist rode on the wind and passed by on the clouds. Seeing this flying ship, he couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. He saw Zhong cheering there, and after thinking for a moment, he flicked his sleeve, and a spiritual light flew over. The little white fox shook its ears, and with a leap, it caught the spiritual light in its mouth and placed it beside Wu Shangqiu's feet. Wu Shangqiu picked it up and saw that it was a sleeve bag, but the carp pattern on it was suitable for children to wear. The manna on it was still there, and it was obviously changed just now. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Elder, what is the meaning of this?" The Taoist smiled and said, "Send my regards to Yuan Shangzhen." With that said, he flicked his sleeve and left. Wu Shangqiu knew that he was misunderstood, so he could only bow from afar. "Thank you for the treasure, elder. If I see Yuan Shangzhen, I will definitely pass your message." Lu Qiuhua said, "Husband, just now, you forgot to ask for this Taoist's name." Wu Shangqiu said, "It's fine. If I see Yuan Shangzhen again, I just need to mention this matter, and he will know who he is." Lu Qiuhua was slightly surprised, and she said, "According to what you said, this Yuan Shangzhen really has the ability to know the future?" Wu Shangqiu shook his head and said, "It's not that simple. My cultivation level isn't high, so I don't know the reason behind it. Later, I can find a Taoist book for Madam to take a look, and Madam should be able to understand." Half a day later, Wu Shangqiu returned to his immortal's cave. Although he was only an aura refining cultivator in the past, he still had servants and maids by his side. Some were assigned to him by the sect, and some were brought from his home before he went up the mountain. When these people saw that their master had returned, they were extremely happy. Lu Qiuhua naturally took over the responsibility of being the mistress of the house. After meeting them one by one, she made arrangements for them one by one. At this time, when his fellow disciples heard that Wu Shangqiu had returned, they kept coming over to greet him. When they learned that he had married and had children in another realm, they all gave him congratulatory gifts. By the time they finished greeting him, it was already late at night. However, after seeing everyone off, another visitor came to the residence. This person wore a Xiaoyao scarf on his head, a loose Taoist robe, and held a feather fan in his hand. He looked carefree and unrestrained. When Wu Shangqiu saw the visitor, he said in surprise, "Brother Yu, why are you here?" Yu Shenlu pointed at him with his feather fan and said with a smile, "Brother Wu, with our friendship, since you've returned, how can I not come?" Wu Shangqiu quickly invited him in and called Lu Qiuhua and his son and daughter out to greet him. Yu Shenlu said with a smile, "Brother Wu, your son and daughter look very beautiful. Why don't you come and be my disciple?" Wu Shangqiu said happily, "I can't ask for more. Come, Zhong, Nan, quickly kneel and worship me as your master." He knew that Yu Shenlu's cultivation was not high, but he was actually a third-generation disciple. His status and background were far above ordinary disciples. He did not ask for his children to be able to live forever and transcend, that was too far away. As long as they could have the protection of the sect, it would be good enough for them to live a stable life. Yu Shenlu was just joking, but when he saw that Wu Shangqiu was really going to worship him, he became serious and said, "Wait a minute." He held Zhong, with his feather fan and said seriously, "Brother Wu thinks highly of me, I accept it. But with my cultivation, it would be a mistake to teach disciples. But since we're talking about this, I can recommend a good master for your son." Wu Shangqiu said, "Brother Yu is too humble, really too humble." He knew that Yu Shenlu's cultivation was slow because he was a winged human, and his lifespan was extremely long. Therefore, his cultivation path was longer than ordinary people, but it was not a problem of talent. Yu Shenlu laughed and said, "I know very well how much weight I have. Brother Wu, you don't have to flatter me." He waved the feather fan in his hand. "You and I are close friends, so I'll give your children a blessing." He moved a little closer and said, "Do you know that not long ago, 2 disciples under the patriarch regained their memories and have returned to the sect?" Wu Shangqiu's heart moved, and he said, "Are you talking about the 2 elders Wang?" "This news has been widely spread some time ago, so I naturally know about it." Yu Shenlu said, "Just now, the 2 uncle masters have returned to the sect. Their cultivation has not recovered, and there are no capable people under them. Your 2 children's experience is extraordinary, so I can find a way to send them to the 2 uncle masters' side." Wu Shangqiu was pleasantly surprised and could not help but say, "Brother Yu, is there really a chance?" If they could be apprenticed to the two of them, then his children would be the righteous grand disciples of the patriarch, and their seniority would be much higher than his. Yu Xinlu smiled and said, "Don't worry, if I ask my master to mediate, this matter is in the bag. At the very least, it will be a registered disciple." Wu Shangqiu hurriedly said, "How would I dare to ask for more? Even a registered disciple is good enough." There were only 9 disciples under the Grand Supreme. Even if one could become a registered disciple under one of these 9, it would be a great fortune. Yu Xinlu was a man of action. He laughed, got up, and said, "Now, I don't know how many people are trying to be apprenticed to my 2 uncle masters. I need to go and arrange this matter as soon as possible. When I come back, Brother Wu, please invite me to drink this cup of wine." As he said this, he cupped his hands and left. On the other side, after Yuan Jianqing returned, he first went to Lu Yenni's residence to explain what had happened, and then he said goodbye to her and went to Xianyuan Heaven. When he arrived at the Taoist palace, he made a brief report and was summoned to the main hall to see Zhang Yan. He went up to greet him and repeated the situation. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Although the ghost that disciple saw this time was not the original, but since I have seen one, then I can find another place to leave a trace, and it will have nowhere to hide." He could already deduce that the existence that Yuan Jianqing met had divided its power into different boundaries, so that it existed in every boundary that was worshipped, but it was also not there. As long as he did not find all the boundaries that were worshipped, he would not be able to find it. But as a mighty expert of the spirit refinement realm, he had extraordinary means. As long as he found another place where it was worshipped, even if it was covered by the Weili, he could still deduce its location. Yuan Jianqing thought for a moment and said, "When I came out, eldest senior sister said that there is still an unknown boundary, and there has been no news from her so far. Master, disciple is thinking about it. Could there be a clue in that place?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This gate has not been destroyed. We will be able to see the results in half a year's time." Chapter 2001. Kunshe Continent. In the main hall of the Taoist temple, Wang Kaiwei was reading a letter in detail. After reading it, she put it down and said, "Sister, Junior Marshal Brother Jing sent a letter saying that he wants to recommend a pair of children to be our disciples." Wang Kating didn't care and said, "Since it's Junior Marshal Brother Jing's recommendation, I think there's nothing wrong with it. Let's just accept it." Wang Kaiwei nodded and said, "Since it's Junior Marshal Brother Jing's request, we can't reject it. You can bring this pair of children over to take a look. If they can be trained, then we'll accept them." Although Jingyu wasn't in the same sect as them, he was more like one. In the past, he had taken care of the 2 sisters and had always been very careful. This time, he only recommended them to be tested and didn't say that they must accept them. It was just that the matter of accepting a disciple wasn't something that could be done casually, especially since the karma between master and disciple was very important. If the aptitude was too poor, then it wouldn't be a good thing for both the disciple and the master. After making a decision, Wang Kaiwei ordered her subordinates to bring them over. Only a few days later, the 2 children were brought in front of her. Wang Kaiwei took a look at them. Both Zhong, and Nan were very beautiful and their aptitude wasn't bad either. She liked them a little. Jingyu's letter explained that these 2 children were young but saved their parents from a dangerous situation. This time, they traveled through the void to come here. This was already a rare experience among people of the same age. Wang Kating seemed to like Nan, very much. After asking a few questions, she found that this little girl was well-mannered and very sensible. Although she herself had an erratic temperament, she liked this kind of disciple. She said, "Sister, that Nan seems to be quite suitable for me. Why don't you let me be your disciple?" Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "Since you like him, then so be it." She thought for a moment and looked at Zhong, and said, "You're Zhong, right? It's not convenient for me to accept male disciples now. However, since you and your sister came together, then you can cultivate here first. All the techniques and medicines will be the same as the disciples in my sect. When your cultivation has improved, you can choose to stay or choose another master. What do you think? At this moment, Zhong-er still had the mind of a child. He wanted to acknowledge someone as impressive as Yuan Jianqing as his master, so he said, sure. When Wang Kaiwei saw that it was settled, she called for her personal attendant to report this matter to Jing Yu and the two children's parents. When Wu Shangqiu heard about this, it was already half a month later. He was also overjoyed. Even though only Nan-er successfully became a disciple of the Wang sisters, Zhong-er also stayed. He still had a choice in the future, so he didn't have much to hope for. On the second day after he received the news, a disciple came to his place and told him that Elder Quan had summoned him for an inquiry. After Wu Shangqiu comforted Lu Qiuhua, he came to the cave dwelling anxiously. Seeing Elder Quan sitting in front of the myriad world's instrument, he quickly went up to greet him. Elder Quan said in a deep voice, Wu Shangqiu, I have already heard about what happened to you from Shangzhen. You were bewitched. Logically speaking, this is not your fault. However, you were delayed for a few days. If you didn't have any ulterior motives from the start, this mistake wouldn't have happened. Wu Shangqiu lowered his head and said, yes, I have indeed made a huge mistake. I will let the sect punish me, and I won't dare to have any complaints. Elder Quan took a look at him and nodded slowly. Fortunately, you came to your senses in the end, so your merits and demerits offset each other. I won't hold you accountable this time. Go back and cultivate well. Wu Shangqiu was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed. He bowed and said, thank you for your forgiveness, Elder. He exited from the cave dwelling. He had been worrying about this matter for the past few days. Now that he was free, he felt relaxed. He looked at the vast sky outside and immediately left with a flash of mysterious light. At this moment, Elder Quan was still looking at the myriad world's instrument in the cave dwelling. He thought to himself, after Wu Shangqiu's return, there is still one last world that hasn't appeared. According to the news that Yuan Shangzhen brought back, I'm afraid I will have to wait for another half a year before I can see that place. In the unknown world, in a big city. A handsome young master dressed in a purple light coat walked on the winter street. He stopped in front of a tea house, and the waiter opened the thick curtain. Instantly, a gush of warm air gushed out. Young Master Zhan is here. Please take a seat in the private room upstairs. Young Master Zhan nodded and walked up the vermilion stairs to the private room facing the window on the third floor. He took off his fur coat and sat down. After a while, the waiter sent a cup of tea and a few plates of dried fruits to the table. He then bowed and said, I will be waiting at the door. Young Master can call me anytime if you need anything. Young Master Zhan casually threw a string of copper coins to the waiter. The waiter caught it and said, thank you, young master, for the reward. He then left happily. Young Master Zhan opened the lid of the tea, and instantly, a fragrance came out. He took a sip and praised. He looked at the people on the street and felt a sense of comfort. He muttered to himself, unknowingly, it has been 7 years since I came here. He was Zhan Xinping, a disciple of the Zhaoyu sect. He was different from the others in that he had come to cultivate the Tao not to seek immortality, nor to live forever, but to find the reincarnation of his deceased wife. When he came to the mountain, he was already in his 20s. Logically speaking, he should have had no hope of cultivating the Tao. Who could have imagined that he would be an anomaly? At such a young age, he had actually succeeded in opening his meridians, which was rare among the disciples. This was one of the reasons why the mountain and sea realm was so rich in spiritual opportunity, as well as the quality of external medicine. In the original 9 continents, such a thing would have been impossible, unless one turned to the Tao of strength. Of course, one's achievements would not have been very high. Later, he asked an elder, and learned that because of Bushutian's involvement with the various heavens, his deceased wife's reincarnation was most likely not in the mountain and sea realm. Unless the mortal slew was willing to perform divination, it would be impossible to find her. After learning this, he became disheartened, and no longer had any desire to cultivate the Tao. When he heard that the unknown world was empty, he didn't think of performing any meritorious deeds. Instead, he came with the intention of hiding from the world. He had never imagined that this world would be to his liking. The spiritual opportunity was neither too high nor too low, and there weren't any almighty beings who could fly through the heavens or tunnel through the earth. Therefore, he used the methods of Taoist cultivators to amass quite a bit of wealth. He bought a courtyard house in Dei, and then bought some land outside of the city to collect rent. He spent his days leisurely, reading books, drinking wine, and chatting with some of the children of the official clans he had befriended. He listened to music and listened to music. It was a very comfortable life. If it were possible, he would have preferred to live like this. However, he knew that the sect would eventually send someone to take him over. When that time came, he would have so many fellow disciples who were above him, and his days would not be so easy. One day, he was pushed by some unknown force, and through the realm escaped Pearl into the river, allowing it to float away with the current. Shaking his head, he pulled himself out of his reverie and looked down. What he saw next caused him to stare in shock. He saw a heroic-looking woman with a sword on her waist riding a horse. If it was any other woman, he wouldn't have paid attention to her. However, this woman looked very similar to his late wife. He couldn't help but stand up, and his eyes followed the silhouette. However, the woman quickly disappeared at the corner of the street. He was no longer in the mood to drink tea, and hurriedly returned home. He then sent someone to ask around, and found out that it was the daughter of Li Maoran from a wealthy family outside of the city. Her name was Li Yuning. After thinking for a long time, he sent someone to ask for her hand in marriage. Li Maoran was only a wealthy family, and not an official's family. He was confident that with wealth, it wouldn't be difficult for the other party to agree. However, he didn't expect that after a few days, Li Maoran would personally visit him, and apologetically told him that the marriage wouldn't be possible. Zhang Xinping asked for the reason, and found out that Li Maoran's daughter was chosen by a celestial when she was 7 years old, and was brought up the mountain to be taught celestial techniques. This time, she came back to visit her parents, and on the day Zhang Xinping saw her, she had already returned to the mountain. Li Maoran said that if Zhang Xinping was willing, he would marry his other daughter to Zhang Xinping. Although Zhang Xinping was a little disappointed, he understood this. Celestials and mortals were worlds apart, and these matters couldn't be decided by Li Maoran. After finding out where the spirit mountain was, Zhang Xinping asked him to return. After sitting for a night, he handed the house to one of his trusted subordinates to take care of it, and he made some preparations, heading towards the spirit mountain called Dangyang Mountain. After traveling for half a month, he arrived at the mountain area. He found that there was a forest surrounding the mountain, and there was a hidden battle array. If it was a normal person, it would be difficult to enter, but he was a cultivator, so naturally, it couldn't stop him. It didn't take long for him to find the mountain. He also saw a man in hemp who was drawing water. When the man saw him, he was a little surprised and asked, "Young master, where are you from?" Zhang Xinping looked at him. This was the first time he came into contact with a cultivator of this world since he came to this world. He didn't directly state his intention, but said, "I heard that there are celestials living here, so I came to seek celestial cultivation." The man in hemp kindly advised, "Young master's age is not suitable for cultivation. I'm afraid that the cultivators in the mountain are not willing to accept you." Zhang Xinping said, "It's okay. Can you lead me to meet you?" Seeing that he didn't give up, the man in hemp thought about it and gave him a wooden talisman, saying, "Young master, you can go up the mountain with this." Zhang Xinping took it and thanked the man. After that, he went up the mountain without being stopped, and successfully met with an elder in charge. The elder also said that he was too old, and it was difficult for him to cultivate. This wasn't a problem for him, so he immediately gave a bottle of medicinal pills that he brought from the mountain gate. After seeing the medicinal pills, the elder was moved. After thinking about it, he recognized him as a relative and accepted him as a disciple of Dangyang sect. Zhang Xinping stayed there. Later, he found that the people in the sect were very friendly, and there was no competition between them, which was to his liking. If you were in the mountain and sea realm, because the junior disciples were responsible for driving out the outsiders, there would often be elders and fellow disciples to hone their skills and learn from each other. There would also be supervisors who would check on his homework every day. There would be a test every 3 days, and a review every 5 days. It was like someone was whipping him from behind, and he had no choice but to move forward. But here, things were much better. No one asked him how he was doing, and he spent his days traveling and enjoying the scenery. 2 months later, he met Li Yunying. The more he looked at her, the more he felt that she was the reincarnation of his late wife. After a few interactions, he realized that she was completely focused on the Tao, and had no worldly desires. Therefore, he tried to teach her some of the basic breathing techniques he had learned. Li Yunying was very happy, and would often come to ask him questions about cultivation. After a while, the two of them became familiar with each other. Zhan Xinping was very patient, and didn't make any rash requests. 3 years after he arrived, the mortal world was embroiled in chaos. He took the initiative, and found a way to bring Li Yunying's family to the mountain. Li Yunying was moved by him, and they became Taoist partners. However, the unrest at the foot of the mountain grew more and more intense, and word spread that a new sect had sprung up in the mortal world, worshipping a ghost god known as the Heavenly Sage. Zhan Xinping had the feeling that this sect had something to do with the mission assigned to him by the sect. However, he didn't think that it had anything to do with him. He had even thrown away the escape pearl. Furthermore, no matter how chaotic the mortal world became, it wouldn't cause any trouble for this immortal mountain. All he needed to do was live his life as an immortal. However, there were some things that, when they happened, would always come to a halt. 3 years later, hundreds of ghost god boats appeared outside of Dangyang Mountain, riding on dark clouds. Chapter 2002. Smoke and fire flew everywhere, and the grass and trees were scorched. Dangyang Mountain, the once beautiful and misty celestial mountain, had become a piece of scorched earth, and the entire mountain was razed to the ground. That day, thousands of ghost boats came, and countless yin fire and ghost thunder burned and bombarded the mountains. The 800 flying heaven swords that Dangyang sect relied on to defend the city had no power to resist, and were defeated in an instant. In the barren mountains, Zhan Xinping's expression was gloomy, and he stepped into the mud. At this moment, he had already used up his inner qi, and in order to avoid the pursuers, he chose the barren mountains and wild paths to walk. The huge Dangyang sect was now destroyed, and because Li Yunying's cultivation in Dangyang sect was higher, she was one of the 3 sword protectors in the sect. When the enemy invaded, she naturally had to go up to defend, and he could not persuade her. Until now, her life and death were unknown. He was only able to escape by relying on the magic boat that the Yutsang sect gave him before he crossed the boundary. At this moment, he could not help but be angry that his cultivation was too low, or else things would not have turned out this way. At least he could forcefully take Li Yunying and escape. When he first came to this world, he was still in the second realm of clear qi. But after coming here, because he no longer had the desire to improve, he slacked off a lot. Compared to when he first came here, his cultivation did not advance, but instead regressed. After walking for a long time, he saw a cave covered by branches and vines, and his eyes brightened. He could not help but quicken his pace, and walked inside. When he first entered the realm, although he thought he could come and go as he pleased in this world, out of some consideration, he deliberately left a cave here that could be used as a retreat, and placed some important things here. After entering, he closed the cave door, and with a flick of his finger, the pearl embedded in the wall immediately lit up. He took a few steps, swallowed a pill, and sat on a thick praying mat to breathe and adjust his breathing. When he caught his breath, he chanted a few incantations, and after a while, a carp poked its head out of the ground. Seeing it was him, it jumped out, and circled around him fawningly. Because Blue Feather Pavilion was a lower sect of Qinsong, almost every disciple of Bright Nether Lake who crossed to Wei Ming World would bring 1 or 2 living creatures, and this carp was brought by him. He asked coldly, "Has it been opened down there?" The carp wagged its tail. Zhan Xinping heaved a sigh of relief. The bottom of this cave led straight to the sea, but there wasn't a suitable path. Now that it was clear, even if the people of Heavenly Saint Cult chased after him, it wasn't like he had nowhere to run to. After meditating for a whole night, he got up and took down a bird egg from the gold and bronze shelf. He channeled his inner chi into it. Not long after, the eggshell cracked, and a fledgling came out, letting out a tender cry. He took out a few secret pills and fed it. In just a few hours, it had grown into an unremarkable bird. This bird's name was Han Ting, and it was also something he had brought with him from his sect. This bird could be used as a substitute for a cultivator in gathering information. In the past, he had never used it, but now he had no choice but to bring it out. After releasing the bird, he waited carefully in the cave. About half a month later, with the sound of flapping wings, the bird turned back. Zhang Xinping extracted a drop of blood from its body and swallowed it. During this period of time, everything that the bird had seen and heard appeared in its mind. After a long while, he opened his eyes, and his spirits lifted slightly. It turned out that it wasn't just one sect that had suffered this calamity. Many sects had been destroyed, and among the people who had attacked Dangyang sect, there were many who originally had outstanding battle prowess. However, for some reason, they were now dead set on following Heavenly Saint Cult. Zhang Xinping thought about it. Looking at it this way, it was very likely that Li Yunying had also been captured, and she might not necessarily die in battle. However, it was almost impossible for him to save her with his martial arts. Regardless of whether it was those flying ships or the Yin fire and ghost lightning, they didn't seem like something that the natives of this world could create. He suspected that Heavenly Saint Cult had very likely come from beyond the heavens. With my own strength, there's no way I can contend against Heavenly Saint Cult, unless I have the help of my sect. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but hesitate. He had intentionally thrown away the Escape Realm Pearl, which was a betrayal of his sect's trust. If the people of his sect came, he would definitely not have a good ending. However, he had a feeling that the influence of Heavenly Saint Cult would definitely grow stronger and stronger. At that time, he would probably only be able to hide in this kind of cave and struggle at death's door, not daring to show his face. If he was not careful, he might lose his life. He thought to himself, I should find the Escape Realm Pearl first. Whether I use it or not, I'll think about it later. After thinking for a long time, he leaped into the cave that the carp had opened up. After a night, he popped his head out beside a large river. This was the largest river on this continent, and it was also where he had thrown the Escape Realm Pearl back then. However, it was extremely difficult to find this item here. After all, no one knew where it had ended up after so many years. However, he had no good ideas now. He could only search while avoiding the pursuit of Heavenly Saint Cult. This search went on for 7 years. He went back and forth across the river 3 times, then went through all the tributaries. Finally, he found the ocean, but he still didn't find anything. However, he didn't give up, because this was his only path of retreat. Furthermore, he wasn't just relying on luck. Every time he searched a place, he would place a talisman that he had personally drawn there. As long as something with similar spiritual energy passed by, it would cause the talisman to change. When he examined it again, he would be able to find something. Another 2 years later, when he was inspecting a certain talisman paper, he unexpectedly discovered that a talisman had curled up. He immediately became excited, and after inspecting all the nearby talisman papers, he discovered that the item was heading upstream. It was heading towards a branch altar of the Heavenly Saint Cult. Although he had some misgivings in his heart, he couldn't care less. He simply followed behind the talisman. Mountain and Sea Realm, Pengyuan Sect, Dawn Awakening Hall. Jiang Jing awoke from his meditation. He opened his eyes and looked around the hall. Nothing had changed since he had been in secluded meditation. He looked at the wall on the right, and there were paintings hanging there. The first painting was Dan Huizhen's side profile. In the painting, she was dressed in a palace robe. She held a jade bead high in one hand, and her head was slightly raised. She stepped on a cloud and her belt fluttered. Her posture was graceful and beautiful. He remembered that this was what he had done for her after they became Tao companions. However, in the blink of an eye, she had reincarnated for dozens of lifetimes. He shifted his gaze and looked towards the left wall of the palace. There was a huge painting that was 3 feet in length there, and it occupied the entire palace wall. It depicted the mountains, rivers, and land of the 9 continents. It included the geographical features of the entire 9 continents. He still remembered how his heart was filled with emotions when he first drew the painting back then, and it gushed out from his heart. He shifted his gaze again and looked at the other paintings. If it wasn't the portraits of his trusted disciples, then it was the beautiful scenery of the 9 continents that he had drawn himself. Looking at these, his past experiences couldn't help but appear in front of his eyes. He had cultivated for 3,000 years and had left behind too many traces. Some only existed in his memories, but some were left behind like this. After sitting quietly for a while, he called out. After a while, the palace door slowly opened, and a disciple came in. He bowed and said, "Perfected One." Jiang Zheng asked, "I have been in secluded meditation for a long time. How is the sect now?" The disciple saw that there was nothing unusual about Jiang Zheng. Obviously, he didn't succeed in breaking through this time. His heart sank slightly, but he immediately calmed down and said, "Perfected One, everything is fine in the sect." Jiang Zheng nodded and said, "That's good. Go and invite all the elders in the sect." The disciple originally wanted to say something, but seeing that Jiang Zheng didn't seem to want to say more, he didn't mention it anymore. He lowered his head and said yes, bowed, and left. Not long after, a few elders entered the hall with solemn expressions. An hour later, they came out one after another, but no one said why Jiang Zheng called them this time. The news quickly spread. In just a day, almost everyone in the sect knew about this matter. For a moment, everyone was in a panic, and all kinds of opinions appeared. Perfected One Jiang has been in seclusion for a long time, but he didn't succeed this time. His lifespan has long been up. This time, he called all the elders over. I'm afraid it's to explain the matters after his death. With Perfected One's departure, our Pengyuan sect will no longer have anyone to oversee it. How can we compare with the surrounding sects? I'm afraid this generation will no longer take us seriously. Even if Perfected One reincarnates, there will be the Grand Supreme Tao ancestor to receive him. In his next life, he can also open his memories. It's nothing, but our relationship with the high sect will be severed. Perfected One, why don't you leave behind a personal disciple? Why do you say that? Perfected One has been extremely benevolent to our Pengyuan sect. I don't know how much trouble you've suffered over the years. If you can't pass this time, it will be a pity that your thousands of years of cultivation will be wasted. Although Jiang Zheng was in the hall at this moment, he heard these words clearly. For a moment, he only felt the warmth and coldness of the world in his heart. He shook his head with a smile and said, "There are many ups and downs in the world, but when the breeze comes, only the lingering sound remains." He turned around and came to the altar. He bowed to Zhang Yan's memorial tablet a few times and said respectfully, "This disciple is comprehending the Tao and is at a critical juncture. I haven't been able to pay my respects to Master even after coming out of seclusion. Please forgive me, Master." After bowing, he returned to his original position and sat on the praying mat again. Not long after, golden flames burned on his body. They rose from his feet, from bottom to top, and spread over his head. Then, his entire body turned into nothingness in an instant. However, in the blink of an eye, he appeared in his original position again. However, at this moment, he was no longer the same. In that instant, he had actually cut off his mortal body and created a Dharma body. Once a cultivator transformed into a mortal, due to the perfect integration of qi, it should be silent and there shouldn't be any movement. However, this time, the cultivators in the sect saw a golden flame shooting out from the palace. It connected heaven and earth, as if heaven and man were in harmony. This kind of strange phenomenon could even be seen from far away in other continents. Jiang Zheng raised his head slightly and looked through the palace door at the place where the first rays of dawn appeared. He laughed and recited, "In the past, I heard that the Supreme Dharma once taught me to refine real gold with heavenly fire. I sang a song asking about the world, only cutting off the mortal body and not the heart." After reciting, he waved his sleeve and everything in front of the hall turned into dust in an instant. Then, he looked up at the sky. In a flash, a ray of light broke through the sky and followed the fire of the celestial being and broke through the world. Chapter 2003. Zhan Xinping followed the direction indicated by the talisman paper and chased after it. In the end, he found a large, half-dead fish on a shoal. His heart moved, and with a slash of his finger, he cut open the large fish. Then, disregarding the fresh blood, he fished out an item the size of a chicken. He then took out a handkerchief and carefully wiped it a few times. Once the blood was gone, a jade-like luster was revealed. When the light shone on it, it was the escape realm pearl he was looking for. He laughed loudly. After almost 10 years of hard work, he had finally found this item. However, he didn't use it immediately. Instead, he cleaned it up and carefully put it in his sleeve. It had to be known that if the people from the sect came, even if his life wasn't taken, he would definitely be severely punished. Thus, unless he had no other choice, he didn't want to use it. If he could rely on his own power to find Li Yunying, he wouldn't need to use this item. At the moment, this item was just something he could rely on. After finding the escape realm pearl, he borrowed the water flow to return to his original cave. From then on, he stayed here and released Han Ting from time to check on the situation outside. However, he didn't dare to show himself too much. After so many years, Heavenly Saint cult had already occupied 90% of the world and kept suppressing those who didn't. Among them, they were especially attentive to exterminating the remaining members of the sections. He was afraid that he would be one of them. However, at this time, he suddenly received news of Li Yunying. He felt that something was wrong. How could it be so coincidental? He had been searching for her for so many years to no avail, and now that he found the escape realm pearl, she suddenly appeared. However, he had to admit that even if there was something strange here, he had to find out. In the following days, he investigated and confirmed many times. In the end, he found out that on the day Dangyang's sect was attacked, Li Yunying was indeed injured and was captured. She refused to surrender, and an altar master of Heavenly Saint cult thought highly of her talent and hoped that she would change her mind. Thus, he imprisoned her in a cave residence on Venomous Locust Mountain. Every once in a while, he would send people to persuade her, but Li Yunying's attitude was very firm. Until now, there hadn't been any results. He was secretly anxious. In his opinion, there was no need for Li Yunying to suffer such a loss. She should surrender first. No matter what plans she had in the future, she had to protect herself first. If she lost her life, what was the use of persisting? But no matter what, since he knew her whereabouts, he had to go and save her. After careful planning, he secretly came to Poison Locust Mountain a month later. Perhaps it was because this place had not encountered any accidents in the past 10 years, so he easily snuck in and successfully found the stone room where Li Yunying was imprisoned. However, he didn't rashly enter to rescue her. Instead, he used a talisman he brought from the sect. The talisman turned into a wisp of green smoke and entered the stone room. After that, it transformed into his appearance. When he looked up, he saw that Li Yunying was chained to a stone pillar. His emotions surged, but just as he was about to step forward, he suddenly realized that something was wrong and stopped in his tracks. Although this woman looked very similar to Li Yunying, he was sure that this was not the real Li Yunying. At this moment, the woman slowly raised her head and revealed a smile. "Your brother-in-law, right?" When Zhan Xinping heard the way she addressed him, his eyes narrowed. Li Luhua. Back then, when he had brought Li Yunying's family up the mountain, his little sister wasn't among them. It was said that she had entered another sect. Even when Heavenly Saint cult attacked the mountain, he had never seen her. He suspected that she had died long ago. He didn't expect to see her here today, and the things that appeared later made his heart sink. He asked solemnly, "Where is Yunying?" Li Luhua sighed. "Big sister died long ago." Zhang Xinping's heart trembled, and he immediately gritted his teeth. "Then could you be here just to lure me here?" Li Luhua said helplessly. "Luhua has no choice. Grand Priest has calculated that brother-in-law is a variable in this world. If we don't get rid of him soon, it will hinder the teachings of our heavenly saint cult." When Zhang Xinping heard that, he knew that the situation was bad. He let the incarnation stay inside while he immediately escaped. Li Luhua seemed to know that he was no longer there inside. Since brother-in-law is here, how can he escape? In Bushu heaven, Jiang Zheng escaped out of world heaven and went all the way to Xianyuan heaven. When he arrived at the door of Dao Palace, Jingyu was already standing there to welcome him. He bowed and said, "Congratulations on your success, Master Jiang. Please enter the hall, old master is waiting for you." Jiang Zheng cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, junior brother Jing." He then walked into the palace. When he arrived at the main hall, he saw Zhang Yan sitting on the jade platform with Xian Qi covering his body. His aura rushed into the sky, and the five-colored brilliance behind him shone through the various worlds. Jiang Zheng was instantly excited, and he went forward to bow respectfully. Disciple Jiang Zheng pays his respects to teacher, and congratulates teacher for your success. Zhang Yan laughed heartily and said, "Disciple, there's no need to be so courteous. Come to master's seat." Jiang Zheng said yes, got up, and stood in front of the seat. Zhang Yan looked at him for a moment, then nodded and said, "You didn't disappoint master." "Very good." Jiang Zheng bowed and said, "Before disciple went into secluded meditation, I did my best and didn't think too much about it. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint master." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Doing your best is doing your best. Many people cultivate the Tao, but that word is missing. If we compare the results of others, their Tao heart is only 30 or 40%. Your Tao heart is 70%. Jiang Zheng said, "If it wasn't for master's technique, and if the mountain and sea realm didn't have many opportunities, disciple might not be where I am today." Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Perhaps you feel that your talent is inferior to that of your fellow disciples, but success is success. There's no need to think about the original. Even if you want to ask about the great Tao, you should ask about the future, not the past." Jiang Zheng seemed to understand and bowed. "Many thanks for master's teachings." Zhang Yan asked a few more questions, then said, "You came out of seclusion at the right time. Master has a matter that I want you to take care of." Jiang Zheng hurriedly said, "Please give me your instructions, master." Zhang Yan told him about the matter in the unknown world, then said, "This matter will happen half a year from now. Before that, you can sit and watch in Xianyuan heaven, or you can go to other places to cultivate. If you encounter any difficulties in your cultivation, you can come to me at any time to ask for advice." Jiang Zheng had always been cautious. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Master, according to what junior brother Yuan sensed, there might be some powerful people lurking behind, or some kind of plot. Given disciples' cultivation, I'm afraid it will be difficult to deal with them. I'm not afraid to go, but I'm afraid I'll ruin master's plan." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't worry, there's a fellow Taoist who will go with you." As they spoke, the vague image of a half-snake and half-turtle flashed in the hall. Then, a wisp of water rose and entered Jiang Zheng's sleeve. He said, "If anything happens, this fellow Taoist will come to help." Jiang Zheng recognized that it was the black tortoise, a divine beast, and immediately felt relieved. He bowed and said, "Disciple understands." Zhang Yan gave him a few more instructions and then dismissed him. After Jiang Zheng came out, he returned to the mountain and sea realm. First, he went to the clear nether heavenly lake to pay a visit to eldest sister Lu Yenny. After coming out, he went to Weizi Hongyao's Yin mountain and stayed there for a few days before coming to the Kunshi continent. He knew that the Wang sisters had already reincarnated. This time, he had come out of seclusion, so it was reasonable for him to pay a visit. After determining the direction, with a thought, he arrived outside a vast Tao academy. The gatekeeper saw him appear silently outside the door and guessed that he must be an upper realm cultivator. He immediately stepped forward and said respectfully, "May I know where you come from?" Jiang Zheng said politely, "Please inform the two senior sisters that Jiang Zheng has come to pay a visit." The gatekeeper immediately ordered someone to report. At this moment, the Wang sisters were in the hall looking at Taoist books. When they heard that Jiang Zheng had come, Wang Kaiwei said happily, "So it's fifth junior brother. Sister, come with me to welcome him." When the two sisters arrived at the door, they saw a young cultivator standing there. When he saw them coming out, he clasped his hands and said, "Greetings, senior sisters." The two sisters returned the greeting. Wang Kaiwei saw that Jiang Zheng's body was covered in clear light. He had indeed succeeded in his Taoist cultivation. She was happy for him and said, "Fifth junior brother, I heard a few days ago that you had broken through. I must congratulate you." Jiang Zheng bowed and said, "Thank you, senior sisters." After exchanging greetings in front of the door, the two sisters invited Jiang Zheng into the hall and told the servants to prepare a banquet to welcome him. Wang Kaiwei called another servant and said, "Go tell junior brother Tsun that junior brother Jiang is in my monastery. Invite him over for a chat." The servant immediately left to carry out the order. The three of them sat down in the hall and talked about the things that had happened after they parted. They recalled the old matters of cultivating in the 9 continents and were filled with emotions. Wang Kaiwei said, "Fifth junior brother, are you planning to cultivate in front of teacher or are you returning to Pingyuan sect?" Jiang Zheng said, "I'm planning to set up a cave abode in the Kunshe continent." This time, he would not return to Pingyuan sect. He had been in Pingyuan sect for 3,000 years and protected the sect for 3,000 years. It could be said that he had done his best. Before he severed his mortal body, he had left behind all his experiences in cultivating the mortal shedding. It could be considered that he had officially severed this karma. Although the elders of Pingyuan sect were reluctant, they knew that the fate between the two parties had come to an end. As a disciple of Qinsong, it was impossible for Jiang Zheng to stay here forever. He would eventually have to return to his sect. However, although the fate had come to an end, the friendship between them still existed. After all, many people in Pingyuan sect could be considered his juniors. This door was not closed. Before he left, the heavenly fire that could pierce through the heavens and the earth expressed its intention to take care of the various continents. He believed that even if the Pingyuan sect encountered any trouble in the future, others would give him some face. Wang Kaiwei turned around and said, "Opening up a cave abode is not a small matter. Junior brother, do you have any disciples following you?" Jiang Zheng shook his head. Although he had taught many disciples, they were all considered disciples of Pingyuan sect. The one they worshipped was Patriarch Jingcang, not Zhang Yan or Patriarch Great Underworld. As for himself, he did not have a personal disciple. Wang Kaiwei said, "How about I recommend someone to junior brother?" Jiang Zheng smiled and said, "The recommendation of the two senior sisters will definitely be good." Wang Kaiwei took care of him and ordered someone to bring Zhong over. She told him about her past experiences. When Jiang Zheng heard that, he nodded. He did not have any disciples, so it was suitable for him to take in such a child. At the very least, he could pass the test of temperament. He asked, "What's your name?" Zhong said, "My name is Wu Qianzhong." Jiang Zheng said warmly, "Are you willing to acknowledge me as your master?" Zhong had been in the Tao Academy for so many days. He was no longer as ignorant as when he first arrived. Just by listening to the conversation in the hall, he knew that Jiang Zheng, Yuan Shangzhen, and the Wang sisters were all disciples of the Tao ancestor. He was still young and did not understand what the Tao ancestor represented. He only knew that his sister had become a disciple of the Wang sisters. As her brother, he could not be inferior to them. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed to Jiang Zheng. "Greetings, teacher." Chapter 2004. Jiang Zheng stayed at the Wang sisters' place for a few days and met with Cao Shao during that time. Then, he bade farewell with Zhong and prepared to find a suitable place to build a cave abode on the continent. Because he wasn't in a hurry and Zhong didn't have the ability to fly now, he simply took out a cloud raft to carry him. Zhong stood at the head of the raft and held the little white fox on his head. He looked around with his eyes wide open. Although it wasn't his first time flying, the wilderness of Kunshur continent that was different from the countries of human path still gave him a sense of novelty. Suddenly, a shadow swept past above his head. He couldn't help but be startled and turned his head to look. His eyes caught a fiery crown and emerald feathers that looked like a snake and a bird, but it quickly disappeared into the clouds. He asked curiously, "Master, what is that?" "It's so big." Jiang Jing said, "That should be a dragon sparrow bird. Normally, it's no more than 10 zhang long. If it's a dragon sparrow king, it's 100 zhang long. Only then can it be considered big. These birds may look gorgeous, but they are stupid and have low intelligence. Of course, if it really had intelligence, then it wouldn't dare to fly above his head." However, he wouldn't argue with a bird. Zhong asked with yearning, "Master, when can Zhong fly like a bird?" Jiang Jing smiled and said, "After you open your meridians, Master will give you an artifact and you will be able to fly." Zhong said, "Zhong knows." Zhong is already practicing breathing, but the two martial uncles said that I need 3 to 5 years to open my meridians. It's really too long. Jiang Jing said, "Your two martial uncles are right, but 3 to 5 years is still too short. You can't be impatient. You need to know that this is a foundation that must be firm. Like the wings of a bird, only when they are strong can they spread their wings and soar into the sky." Zhong said loudly, "Yes, Master, Zhong will remember." He carried the little white fox on his head and nodded together. Jiang Jing smiled. At this moment, he turned his gaze and suddenly noticed that there was a place in the distance that was slightly different. He looked in that direction and discovered that it was an earthen city that was adjacent to a lake. The living beings that lived in it were actually people of human path. He said in surprise, "There's actually a human path tribe here." According to what he knew, most of the people of the human path were gathered in Zhaoyuan, and the only one outside was the state of Fu. He did not expect there to be another one here. This place was more than 10,000 miles away from Zhaoyuan, and there were so many ferocious beasts in the wilderness that there were even those that could fly in the sky and tunnel underground. It was almost impossible for the two sides to communicate, so how did these people get here? He thought for a moment, then urged the cloud raft to move closer to that place. As soon as he arrived above the city, he saw a woman with shapely eyebrows and red lips, dressed in light makeup, appearing out of thin air at the head of the raft. She bowed to him and said, "This little girl greets Shangzhen." Jiang Zhen looked at him and asked politely, "Is Her Highness a god of this place?" The woman said, "Yes, I am loved and respected by the people here, they call me Lady Lu Changjun." Jiang Jing asked, "Where did these people of the human path come from, and why are they living here?" Lu Changjun sighed softly, and after a brief explanation, Jiang Jing finally understood where these people came from. Back then, there was a chaotic war between the states of the human path on Zhaoyuan, and after many states were defeated, their officials were exiled from the human path territory, and one of them slowly migrated here. Logically speaking, the barren land was filled with ferocious beasts, and it was difficult for them to reach here. However, at that time, the cultivators from the heavens descended to the lower realm, and not only did they set up abodes everywhere, they even hunted all kinds of ferocious beasts to make instruments and pills. There was also a god who set up a place of enlightenment, and as long as there were living beings, they would be protected, so they stubbornly survived. However, it was difficult to survive on the barren land, and there were only about 10,000 of them. Jiang Zhen could imagine how difficult it was here, and he sighed, "Her Highness has done a great service." Lu Changjun covered her face with her sleeves, and she seemed to be sobbing, "I am here to protect the people, and I don't know how old I am. Moreover, my position is low, and it is difficult for me to reach the ears of the heavens. The Divine Lord has not summoned me for a long time, and I might have forgotten about it. Now that I have received a compliment from the Divine Lord, I have no regrets." Jiang Jing said, "Don't worry, when I return, I will definitely explain this to the Yuanzun. You have done a great service for the human path, and you will not be buried here. Lu Changjun bowed to him, and she said, I thank the Divine Lord, but can you please not report this to the Divine Lord? Jiang Jing asked curiously, why? Lu Changjun said softly, I have been here for a long time, and I am familiar with everything here. In the beginning, there were only a few hundred people here, but now, there are more than 10,000 of them. Everyone here is like my children, and I cannot bear to leave them. Moreover, if the new Divine Lord comes, he might not love them as much as I do. Jiang Zheng was filled with respect, and he nodded, the Divine Lord is righteous. He thought for a while, and he said, you don't have to worry about this, Divine Lord. There is a way to solve both problems here. After a few more words, he bid farewell to Lu Changjun, and he looked down at the mountains for a while. He landed on a mountain that was not far from the city, and with a thought, a golden fire appeared out of nowhere, and in an instant, a cave was formed. He said, Zhong-er, from now on, we will cultivate in that mountain, and we can also protect these people. Zhong-er was confused, Master, aren't there Sister Changjun to protect them? Jiang Jing shook his head, these people have no one to teach them, and they can only rely on the gods. After all, it is not their own ability. If the gods are not around in the future, or if they have bad intentions, they will not even have the ability to protect themselves. Zhong-er hummed in agreement, and he raised his little face, Zhong-er knows. Father said that the gods in heaven have bad tempers, Master must be afraid that they will do something bad. Jiang Zheng could not help but laugh. He rubbed his head and said, this is not wrong. If those gods work for the benefit of the people, they are indeed worthy of respect. However, if they view the interests of the people and not themselves, then they are in the wrong. In that case, the people do not need to respect them. At that time, the people will only be able to declare their will when they have power in their hands. Our teaching is to give them power. Zhong-er thought for a while, and he asked, Master, if the people have the power, will they not harm their own people? Jiang Zheng comforted him, you can think of this, it is enough to show that you are smart. If there are only such people in the world, they will, but there are gods here, so both of them have their own scruples, and they will not go too far. However, the world changes, and it is not that simple. You do not need to understand these now. I give them the power, so that they can be independent. As for how to use it, it all depends on the people themselves. After all, we are detached from the world, and we do not need to interfere too much. Zhong-er seemed to understand, and he nodded his head. Jiang Jing smiled and no longer said these things. He was different from the others in the sect. When he was young, he had always been traveling in the mortal world, so he had this thought. If it was other cultivators, even if they saw the people in trouble, they would only coldly watch from the sidelines. Those who were a bit better would casually help, but they would not care too much. In their eyes, the lifespan of mortals was only 100 years. In a blink of an eye, these people in front of them would turn into dust, so why would they care too much? After Jiang Zheng opened up the cave residence, he stayed here. In the following days, he cultivated with Zhong-er and waited. As long as there was news from the instrument of myriad worlds, he would immediately rush over. Unknown world, inside the poisonous Locust Mountain. After Zhan Xinping knew that the other party came for him, he quickly ran outside. In fact, he also understood that the heavenly gods sect spent so much effort to invite him in, so they must have made a thorough arrangement. However, he was still unwilling. If he didn't try, who knew what the result would be? However, he didn't go far before he noticed that something was wrong. The first half of his journey relied on a secret technique, and the second half relied on the tunnel dug by the carps. This was only one direction, but at this moment, he felt that he was taking a detour. He sneered and thought, such a small technique, don't think about stopping me. He chanted a barrier-breaking incantation in his mind and wiped his eyes with his finger. He immediately saw through the illusion and rushed out regardless of whether there was a trap or not. It was not that he was careless, but if he was a bit slower, he might not be able to get out. Just as he was about to reach the outside, a huge net with golden light flashing over his head came crashing down. He angrily shouted as a sword talisman from his sect flew out from his body. It circled around in the air, and after a series of clanging sounds, this large net made of tough metal was cut by him. However, after the sword talisman came back, it dimmed a bit. It was obvious that it was used up a lot. However, as he poured his inner energy into it, it brightened up again. He swallowed another dan in time, and his inner energy increased as he continued to rush out. At this moment, on top of the mountain outside, there were more than 10 people standing there, watching the situation here. These people all wore exquisite and luxurious clothing, but from the nose down, they all wore half a mask. A man with a long crown covering his face stood in the middle of this group. It seemed like he was their leader. At this moment, this person asked, "Is it this person?" The person next to him answered, reporting to emissary, "The person the Grand Shaman was talking about should be this person." The emissary doubtfully said, "Can this person really topple our heavenly god sect? This time, we only set up a small trap, yet he was tricked. It seems that he is only a so-so." The person next to him said, "This person doesn't know that I am looking for him. If he knew the importance of his sect, then he wouldn't have come." Someone flattered, "Our heavenly god sect is blessed by the heavens, and we are the descendants of the heavenly saint. How could a small variable go against the will of the heavens?" Just now, when he said this, he saw a bronze mirror flying out from Zhang Xinping's body. It shone towards the outside, and the traps that were arranged all around, as well as the maze barrier, all melted away like snow melting under the blazing sun. It seemed that he could rush out. Seeing this, everyone's expression changed. The emissary didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. On the contrary, he revealed a very interested expression and said, "This person seems to have some ability, but I have never seen that magic treasure before. Later, capture it and bring it to me to see." Someone couldn't help but say, "Emissary, our arrangements have been ruined. I'm afraid this person is about to escape." The emissary, on the other hand, had an appearance of victory in his grasp and said, "No problem. Since he is here, he can't leave." Zhang Xinping, seeing that there were no more obstacles in front of him, was ecstatic. He took out his flying boat and prepared to take advantage of the chaos to escape. However, he didn't expect that not long after, it seemed to have hit an invisible barrier, and the flying boat was also locked in the air. He was shocked, and when he took a closer look, cold sweat broke out all over his body. Only now did he realize that all the ley lines in the surroundings had been combed through again and faintly fused into one. This was similar to the great mountain barrier formations he had seen in the past. At this point, he knew that he had nowhere else to go, so he looked around and panted a few times. Then, he laughed loudly, and his laughter was filled with sorrow and unwillingness. He then said hatefully, "You all forced me to do this." He raised his sleeve and took out the escape realm pearl, then raised it into the sky. When the people from Heavenly Saint Cult heard his bitter laughter, they all felt the pleasure of teasing their prey, but the moment he took out the escape realm pearl, everyone, including the emissary, had a bad premonition. However, before they could react, they saw that beam of light rushing into the sky from the pearl. The night turned into day, and in just a moment, a wailing that shook the world descended into the world. Chapter 2005. The moment the heavenly god Sect's messenger and the group felt the arrival of the grand Whaley energy, they knew that things were going to be bad. However, this change came too quickly. The moment the energy came out, all things in the heaven and earth began to shake. Under such circumstances, even if they wanted to, they couldn't make a decision. They saw a figure emerge from the spirit light and slowly materialize. Finally, a tall and straight young man with long sleeves walked out. Judging from his appearance, he wasn't even 30 years old, but deep in his eyes, there was a sense of seeing through all things in this world. The moment the heavenly god Sect's messenger saw this person, he felt an inexplicable sense of fear. They didn't expect Zhang Xinping to have such a trick up his sleeve. It seemed like he invited a supreme Whaley expert to come here. The Heavenly Gods sect also had a similar method that could invite ghosts and deities into the world to fight, but it had never attracted such a powerful existence. At this moment, he could only hope that Zhang Xinping didn't know this person, or that this person simply didn't care about them. Even though Zhang Xinping had never seen Jiang Zheng before, he had some knowledge and knew that even the Heavenly Grotto wouldn't have this kind of momentum. He stepped forward and kneeled down, then he loudly shouted, "Qinsang disciple Zhang Xinping greets the Heavenly God." Jiang Zheng glanced over and said, "Disciple Zhang Xinping lost contact with you at the Myriad Worlds instrument. Why is this?" Zhang Xinping didn't dare to say that it was his own selfishness, so he lowered his head and said, "That year, when Disciple was scouting for enemies, I accidentally lost this item. Later on, I bitterly searched for it. Just now, I finally found it. I am truly ashamed to face the sect." Jiang Zhen glanced at him but didn't say anything. He could see that Zhang Xinping's words were not entirely true, but even if he was to be dealt with, it was a matter within the sect. At the moment, he wasn't in charge of the sect's affairs, so there was no need for him to say anything. No matter what, since he was here, he had to bring this disciple back. He said, "Stand up." Zhang Xinping said yes and stood up obediently. Jiang Zheng's gaze swept over, and he saw the people of Heavenly Saint cult in the surroundings. He stretched out his hand and pointed. "Do you recognize these people?" Zhang Xinping said hatefully, reporting to Shengzhen, "This junior calls himself a disciple of Heavenly Saint cult. In the cult, they often offer sacrifices to ghosts and gods, which might be related to the matter that the sect had instructed me to find. Disciple personally came here to investigate, wanting to clarify the situation before reporting it to the sect. I didn't expect to be careless and get surrounded by this junior, so I had no choice but to inform the sect in advance." At this point, he raised his voice and said, "These people are very cunning. Go, don't let them escape." Jiang Zheng said calmly, "This person can't escape." Zhang Xinping was startled. He looked around and was shocked to find that there seemed to be a layer of vague air barrier around him, and when he looked outside, everything seemed to be frozen, as if the two were no longer in the same world. He couldn't help but be shocked, secretly marveling at the means of the Almighty. Jiang Zheng said, "Wait here." With a shift of his feet, he arrived in front of the emissary and the people of Heavenly Saint cult. When the emissary saw Jiang Zheng standing so close to him, he instantly felt a chill down his spine, and his entire body trembled. Jiang Zheng would naturally not be as courteous to these outsiders as he was to the disciples of the sect. He immediately tried to deduce all of their pasts. However, when he did this just now, he noticed that there were strands of external forces obstructing him, causing him to be unable to continue. As expected, there was an almighty existence behind them. However, even though he couldn't trace back to the almighty existence behind these people, the secrets of these people couldn't be hidden. As long as he pieced all the clues together, he would be able to get a rough idea of the situation. At this moment, the emissary gathered his courage and squeezed out a voice. "We are Heavenly Saint cult members. Sire, 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 for the sake of Heavenly Saint." Jiang Zheng ignored him. In the past, the secret skill of startling dawn that he had cultivated mainly focused on killing. However, that was only the skill of the predecessors. After he had achieved mortal shedding, due to his understanding of the principles, it had changed according to his heart, and all kinds of wondrous effects had been derived. It could be said that compared to the original technique, it was a completely different path. He looked at the emissary, and his eyes slowly lit up. First, an aurora appeared, followed by a bit of scorching true fire. In an instant, it was reflected in the eyes of everyone present. This spark first ignited in the heart of this person, and in an instant, it became a prairie fire, jumping and spreading in the minds of the people of Heavenly Saint cult. At the same time, countless images flashed in front of his eyes. Tens of thousands of miles away, the Great Qi Mountain was where the headquarters of Heavenly Saint cult was. This place was built on a tall mountain, and the entire city was built from sturdy rocks. It was divided into 96 levels, and it had the power to reach the sky. After Heavenly Saint cult had conquered most of the sects in the mortal world, they had ordered these people to use special divine arts and use millions of people to build this city. This city was grand and majestic. As long as one stood on the border of the Du Kingdom, no matter where they looked, they would be able to see this mysterious shadow reaching the sky. It could be considered a marvel in the mortal world. At this moment, the heavenly god Sek's grand priest was standing at the top of the heavenly pavilion, and he was reverently worshipping a golden ball. This object occasionally flickered as if it was responding to something. However, the moment he bowed down again, he suddenly let out a miserable scream. Golden flames spurted out from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Then, he turned into a pile of ashes in front of his close followers. At this moment, not only him, but the devout believers in the heavenly saint city were also the same. Everyone walking on the streets suddenly had flames erupting from their bodies. In the blink of an eye, they all turned into smoke, leaving only their clothes behind. In the Du Kingdom's capital, the young emperor, who was just only 12 years old, sat on the throne in a trembling manner. He fearfully looked at the heavenly god Sek's heavenly saint messenger sitting not far away from him. At this moment, the officials around him were either subservient to the heavenly saint sect, or they were part of the sect. Even his attendants had become believers of the sect. He had already become a puppet, and he only came to the court every day to put on an act. He didn't even know how long he could sit there. After the court officials finished reading the memorial, it should have been the young emperor's turn to speak. However, he didn't dare to open his mouth. He looked at the heavenly god Sek's heavenly saint messenger and asked, Heavenly saint messenger, do you have anything else to say? The heavenly saint messenger snorted, stood up, and looked down. Anyone who was stared at by him couldn't help but lower their head. He revealed a satisfied expression and was about to speak, but suddenly, a flame appeared on his body, and with a loud bang, he turned into nothingness. This scene did not only occur in these two places, but also in the 4 directions of the Earth continent. Under the sky, anyone who truly worshipped the so-called heavenly saint all turned into ashes at the same time. The heavenly god Sek's great power that had been accumulated for countless years vanished in just one night. Jiang Zhen quietly stood in the same spot. Each time a heavenly saint follower was burned, he would see their memories. When all the followers died, he also roughly sorted out the clues at this place. 500 years ago, the Jiao Kingdom's founding ancestor wanted to build a national mausoleum. He chose the Great Qi Mountain as the location for the feng shui. There was a continuous stretch of black stones, and not even a blade of grass grew there. Then, he began to build a large amount of construction and chisel stones to open the mountain. However, one day, the mountain wall collapsed, revealing a 10-zhang gap. They originally thought that it was a natural cave, but later on, they found out that this place was very strange. Anyone who entered never came out again. At that time, the commander responsible for the construction of the Feng Shui Imperial Mausoleum immediately mobilized a group of elite soldiers equipped with sturdy shields and armor. Then, he sent a group of strange people to investigate, but in the end, there was no news of these people. After the Jiao Kingdom's founding ancestor heard of this matter, he invited a divination master. The divination was not beneficial to the kingdom, so he ordered people to seal this place and forbid all records. Several hundred years later, the Jiao dynasty was destroyed and the Du dynasty was established. Because of the loss of the scriptures and the intentional concealment, no one knew about this matter. However, there seemed to be a mysterious force pushing this generation's ruler to choose this place as the location of the Feng Shui Imperial Mausoleum. This time, after the excavation, they encountered the same strange event from several hundred years ago. However, the emperor of the second dynasty was exceptionally determined this time. He ordered for the matter to be cleared up. Countless people were sent into the cave, and he offered great rewards. He summoned all the talents in the world to investigate. In the end, more than 10 people came out alive, and they brought back 3 secret manuals. There were many secret techniques and divine powers recorded in the scriptures. There was also a picture of the heavenly saint. What was mysterious was that one didn't need to do anything. All one had to do was worship it and they could obtain unimaginable power. However, before this secret scripture was taken into the palace walls, it was lost halfway. For some unknown reason, it ended up in the hands of a king of a small kingdom, which was the origin of the heavenly saint cult. This king obtained his divine powers through worshipping the heavenly saint. He then followed the instructions of the secret scripture and created all kinds of powerful instruments. After accumulating them for dozens of years, he suddenly launched an attack. He invaded the kingdom, occupied the land, and attacked the sections. No one could stop him. Now, except for some remote places, almost all of them were under the control of the heavenly saint cult. However, no matter how powerful he was, there was still a limit to his power in this world. Jiang Zheng only needed to use a few tricks and he didn't even deliberately target it, and it was destroyed in an instant. After Jiang Zheng finished reading, he realized that most of the people in front of him had turned to dust on the spot, but there was still one person who survived. It was obvious that he said he worshipped the heavenly saint, but he didn't believe it at all in his heart, which was why he didn't die. However, this person was still a follower of the heavenly saint cult, and he had also participated in the hunt for the Qinsang disciples, so he couldn't let him live. With a flash of fire in his eyes, this person instantly turned into nothingness. However, when he was about to leave, he discovered that there was a scroll left behind where the messenger's body had turned to dust. He thought about it, but he couldn't find it in the person's memory. With a thought, he activated his magic power, and the scroll slowly opened. On it was a picture of a god riding on a monster with the head of a cow and the body of a tiger. He was surrounded by many heavenly ladies. Jiang Zheng was very cautious. He knew that this picture might be related to the person behind it, so he didn't force himself to look at it. However, even if he didn't search for it, it didn't mean that the other party wouldn't take the initiative to find him. Just now, he was about to leave, but his movements paused. He didn't know when, but the ground under his feet had turned into scorched earth, and it bulged slightly, gathering into a ghostly face with a strange smile. He just happened to be standing on the mouth of the ghostly face. Chapter 2006. Zhang Yan calculated in his heart. If he only cared about the situation in Busu Tian, with his current power, he only needed to maintain this advantage. Then there would be nothing to worry about. It was just that there was still an external force here. Although that existence's true power couldn't seep in, it could change the fate of the heavens. Just like just now, it could clearly calculate the true master, but in the end, it had to go through a lot more trouble. As the arrival of that existence got closer, it was hard to guarantee that it would not attract more. After all, Busu Tian's Weili was limitless, and logically speaking, anything could happen. Under such a pincer attack, it was hard to say that the situation would not be reversed. Thus, he could not be careless until the final outcome was decided. Next, he had to hurry up and eliminate the foreign forces that did not want to deal with him. Speaking of which, those chaotic heavens were half free and half attached to Busu Tian. When the day came that he controlled Busu Tian, he might be able to see many of its secrets. Just as he was calculating, he suddenly found that in the next 100 years, the disciples of the sect would gradually return to their seats. This situation was not a coincidence, but a premonition before a great disaster. What made him vigilant was that if his consciousness had not been focused on Busu Tian, he might have overlooked this. Because of this premonition, after he ordered Jiang Zheng to retreat, he immediately began to calculate the location of the true master. Not long after, his gaze passed through the layers of barriers and saw an indescribable fog of light. This was the true existence known as the Heavenly Saint. This person had the power of a true yang cultivator, but this Weili did not fall in the present, but in the future. This thing was formed from the spiritual essence of the world, and if one obtained it, there was a high chance of becoming a true yang cultivator. After the consciousness of that existence shone in, the shadow of its future was stimulated and gradually transmitted its Weili to the myriad worlds of Busu Tian, causing everything to lean towards itself. Because the difference in power between ordinary people and lower realm cultivators was too great, there was no barrier between illusion and reality. In the eyes of Zhang Yan, all of this was just an illusion, so the moment he saw it, all of the future disappeared, returning to the most primitive source of power, and then slowly disappeared under his gaze. Zhang Yan shook his head. After all, this was a forced reflection of the future, and this power was extremely illusory. If it was a true Yang Almighty being, he would be able to easily erase it, but he would definitely not lose what belonged to him. In reality, if a spirit refinement Almighty being was willing to help promote a disciple to the true Yang realm, it was not impossible. However, if the level of the promoted living being was too low, it would not be able to maintain this power on its own and would soon collapse on its own, unless there was an Almighty being willing to help maintain it from time to time. But whether it was true Yang or mortal shedding, they were all ordinary to a spirit refinement cultivator, so no one would do such a thing. After Zhang Yan eliminated the source of the chaos, he only felt that Bu Su Tian's Weili was closer to him, and he could clearly sense the existence of some strange power. This time, he could try to sweep it clean in one go, so with a thought, he pushed his endless Fa Li to those places. Time passed, and in a flash, 20 years had passed in the Kunshe continent. In the Zhaoyuan Cyprus country, at the foot of Mount Jia, there was a village of more than 300 people. In an ordinary farmer's house, a strong man was anxiously pacing back and forth outside the house. There were bursts of painful sounds coming from inside, accompanied by the shouts of the midwife. After a long time, the sound finally stopped. Just as he was at a loss of what to do, a loud and clear cry suddenly rang out. Then, a strong sense of joy exploded in his heart. Son, it must be a son. But what he didn't know at the moment was that this cry was heard by almost everyone in the village. And at this moment, the animals in the village became extremely quiet, no one dared to make a sound. At the same time, colorful birds flew over and landed on the house, gently combing their feathers. When a villager saw this phenomenon, he immediately reported it to the village chief. When the village chief heard this, he laughed and said, "This is a good omen, looks like Chang Dalong's child is born extraordinary." In the land of the Kunshe continent, because of the unlimited spiritual opportunity, even among the ordinary people, there would often be divine manifestations among newborn children. Although this village chief had not seen it, he had heard of many. For example, there was a child in the neighboring village who was born with extraordinary strength. No matter what it was, he could easily crush it in his hands. When he was 5 years old, he could already fight lions and tigers, and even ordinary monsters. Now, he was taken away by a minister of the country. Thinking that there was also such a person in his village who was blessed by the heavens, he was very happy and said, "Let's go take a look." Jia village was a small village, nothing could be hidden. The villagers were curious, and when the village chief moved, they also squeezed over to watch the show. When Chang Dalong heard that the village chief had arrived, he hurriedly came out to welcome him. The village chief congratulated him a few times and stepped into the courtyard. Just now, when he came in, he saw a group of squirrels running in. Chang Dalong wanted to chase them away, but unexpectedly, the squirrels stood up and bowed to him. The village chief's heart moved, but he stopped him. What happened next surprised everyone. The squirrels put down the pine cones in their mouths, then went out to bring in another one. With their hard work, the courtyard was soon filled with a pile of pine cones. The village chief laughed and pointed, "Chang Dalong, this is a congratulatory gift for your family, looks like you're not an ordinary child." Chang Dalong touched the back of his head and revealed a simple and honest smile. At this moment, the sound of flapping wings suddenly came from the sky. The villagers looked towards the sound and saw 2 birds that were half black and half white, their tail feathers like ribbons, standing on the eaves. A sharp-eyed person immediately shouted happily, "Heaven swallow, it's heaven swallow." The heaven swallow was not big, but it was a kind bird, a lucky bird. If it lived on top of a house, then it could protect the safety of the family. Even if the child was in danger, it would cry out. Also, this bird specialized in eating poisonous insects and some grass worms in the fields, so it wasn't just one family that benefited, but the entire village. It was no wonder that the villagers were so happy. The village chief chuckled. He didn't expect that Chang Dalong's son would bring benefits to the village the moment he was born. At this moment, he suddenly felt something and looked towards the corner. He saw a creature that looked like a cat or a dog quietly squatting there. Its whole body was green, it looked small and exquisite, and its eyes were very lively. He trembled and cried out, "Green grasshopper." The green grasshopper could prey on snakes and rats, and also had the ability to ward off evil and guard the house. With it here, evil spirits and ghosts couldn't come near, so this creature was worshipped as a family deity in remote places. At this moment, the village chief wasn't just shocked, his heart was shaken. One vision was still fine, but the simultaneous appearance of more than one meant that Chang Dalong's son was very extraordinary. He looked at the baby that was carried out by the midwife and sighed, "You little boy, you're amazing, amazing." At Chang Dalong's request, he named the child Zai on the spot and concluded, "Don't look at how your son has just been born. Who knows, we might have to rely on him in the future." In the blink of an eye, 4 years had passed. Chang Zai was now 4 years old, but he already had the size of a 7 or 8-year-old child. His intelligence also grew very quickly. As he gradually grew up, more visions appeared. As long as he walked to the river, there would be schools of fish following him. Sometimes, they would even jump onto the shore and let him catch them. When he slept in the wilderness, there would be birds with big leaves to cover him, and there would be tigers and wolves catching small beasts to satisfy his hunger. However, at this time, there were really many strange people in the world. The villagers had seen many of them, and as time passed, they got used to it. If there were no accidents, he might grow up to be an adult. Just now, he would leave the village and wander outside. Until one day, when the village worshipped the god of Mount Jia, Chang Zai followed his parents and kowtowed. However, when he kowtowed, the shrine shook and almost broke. That night, the god of Mount Jia appeared in his dream and said that there was a noble in the village, and he couldn't accept his great bow. Even though the god didn't say who it was, the villagers could more or less guess who it was. The village chief specially came to Chang Dalong's house and said, "Dalong of the Chang family, you are born with visions, it's a pity to leave you in the village." Chang Dalong was an honest farmer and didn't know much. When the god appeared in his dream, he also guessed that it was his son. He didn't know what to do and asked, "What does the old village chief say?" The village chief said, "Zai has strange powers, why don't we send him to the immortal palace to be a cup holder?" The immortal palace was actually established by the feudal vassals of the countries of human Tao. Because the gods of the heavens wouldn't participate in the internal conflicts of the feudal vassals, and these people were eager to pursue divine arts, they finally set their sights on the cultivators. To be more precise, it was the rogue cultivators. Due to the endless spiritual opportunities in Kunsher continent and the inexhaustible foreign resources, and with the extermination of many different species, the cultivators could set foot in more and more lands. As a result, the rogue cultivators who were the most down and out in the past started to prosper. The rogue cultivators didn't have their own race like the big sects, so the disciples could only go to the different species tribes or the countries of human Tao to find them. The immortal abode was established under such circumstances. The feudal vassal states would gather children who were born with visions within their borders, teach them words and etiquette, and wait for the cultivators to come and choose them. If a child was chosen by the cultivators, not only would they gain a favor, they could also receive a generous gift. Even the children who were old and not chosen could also serve the country in the future because they had strange powers. The rogue cultivators were also very satisfied with this. Originally, they needed to travel around and find suitable people to teach them. That was completely based on luck. But now that so many children were gathered together, they could always find someone who was compatible with them, saving them the time of searching personally. Of course, if one wanted to enter the immortal abode, they needed someone to recommend them. It wasn't easy to enter, and the village chief didn't have this ability. This time, he came because the god of Mount Jia had appeared in his dream and was willing to be the person to recommend them. That was why he dared to bring up this matter. Even though Chang Dalong was honest, he also knew that this was a rare opportunity. Even though he was reluctant, he still said, "Old village chief, I agree. Just tell me what you want me to do." The old village chief smiled and said, "There's no need for you to do anything. It's just that no matter how extraordinary you are, you're only 4 years old. The road isn't smooth, and I'm old, my muscles and bones are already weak. I don't have the strength to travel, so I need you to personally send me to the capital. Then he patted Chang Dalang's shoulder and said, if you and your son prosper in the future, don't leave our village behind. Chapter 2007. Chang Dalang prepared for a day and set off with Chang Zai. Originally, the village chief wanted to lend his donkey to the father and son. However, Chang Dalang was afraid that they would encounter some wild beasts on the way. If the donkey was eaten, he would not be able to afford it, so he did not ask for it. Originally, he wanted to take care of his son this time, but in the end, he benefited a lot from his son. Not long after the father and son went out, 2 wild horses came over to be their mounts. Even without a saddle and bridle, they walked steadily. Most of the population of the Bai Kingdom was concentrated in the capital, and the rest of the land was mostly scattered villages. Jieshan village was one of the more remote villages, so they did not see a single person for more than half a day. Fortunately, every 100 miles, there were some sentry posts and beacons to let people know that they were still in the border of the Bai Kingdom. However, it was already early autumn, and this was not a strictly guarded place, so most of the soldiers in the original beacons had already removed their armors and returned. The soldiers who were supposed to be on duty had not yet arrived. The father and son stayed here at night. With Chang Zai here, even if there was no fire at night, there was no need to be afraid of wild beasts. On the first night, Chang Dalang found the footprints of wild wolves outside and was nervous for a while. However, Chang Zai told him that these wild wolves were here to protect him, so he was relieved. These years, he had a lot of faith in his son's ability. During the day, the two of them did not need to know the way at all, and let the horses go by themselves. Not only did they go smoothly, but they also avoided some dangerous places with monsters and evil spirits. As for food, there was no shortage. As long as there was a forest in the distance, there would be monkeys coming over to offer fruits. Sometimes, they would even bring a gourd of monkey wine. In this way, the originally difficult journey became comfortable. Because they avoided all the dangers, the father and son took a few more detours. It was not until half a month later that they arrived at the capital of the Bai Kingdom. The Immortal Palace was very easy to find. It was in the Qingtian court on the outskirts of the city. This place was vast, facing the lake, and behind it was the food mound. Sometimes, red-crowned cranes would circle here. Chang Dalang found the Immortal Palace guard and handed over the recommendation letter. This book was given by the mountain god of Mount Jia. It was more useful than being recommended by the nobles. Although it was only a mountain god, it was still considered a god. Thus, the local officials did not dare to make things difficult for Chang Zai. They successfully sent Chang Zai to the Immortal Palace and added a stroke to the register. As for the national register, it could be added later. When Chang Dalang returned, the village chief said that he would take care of his family and asked him to take care of Chang Zai without worry. He was also afraid that his son would be bullied because of his young age. However, after a few days, he realized that he was worrying too much. Chang Zai's daily food and clothing were provided by the Immortal Palace, and the people of the Immortal Palace were all polite to children with strange powers. No one dared to do anything out of line. He had been out for so long and he missed home. Coincidentally, there were feng shui soldiers heading to Mount Jia, so they returned together. Soon, more than 4 months had passed. Chang Zai sat on the stone steps of an abandoned palace, basking in the warm sunlight of the beginning of winter as he contentedly nibbled on a large piece of flatbread. On his shoulders stood an iron-tailed eagle. Compared to a few days ago, he seemed to have grown up a lot and was already about 10 years old. After so many days, he had already adapted to life here. Most of the children who could enter the Immortal Palace were born with strange powers like him. However, there were a few who were the children of the nobles. These people were placed here in hopes of being chosen by cultivators. Secondly, they wanted to build a good relationship with Chang Zai and the other children so that they could help them in the future. Since he was a child, Changzai had never lacked meat, but there had never been such fine flatbread in the village. He usually ate beans and corn, so he fell in love with it and ate a few pieces every day. At this moment, a voice was heard from afar. "Ha, Changzai, I knew you were hiding here eating flatbread again." The person who spoke was a strong child. Although his face was young, he was half a head taller than an adult. His name was Yuan Dai. He had been raised by a bear since he was a child. He had muscles of copper and bones of iron, and was extremely strong. There were many people in the immortal palace who were strong, but compared to him, they were far inferior. Next to Yuan Dai stood a clean and handsome young man. He was dressed in a green robe and had a jade pendant hanging from his waist. He was well groomed. His name was Bai Dong, the second son of King Bai. He was surrounded by red light and a strange fragrance when he was born. He also had the ability to see through people's minds. However, this was the bad thing about him. Whether it was King Bai's faction or the nobles, no one liked him. Even parents did not want their children to see what they were thinking at any time, let alone their subordinates. If there was a monarch who could know what they were thinking at any time, how could they still be ministers? Therefore, under the instigation of his ministers, King Bai simply sent him to the immortal palace. If he could catch the eye of a wandering cultivator and be taken in for cultivation, it would be the best of both worlds. These two people did not have many friends in the immortal palace, but they got along well with Changzai. Yuan Dai came up and grabbed Changzai. He said excitedly, "Stop eating. Let's go, let's go. I heard that there are immortals coming to the palace. If we rush there now, we might be chosen. If we are late, it will be too late." Bai Dong said slowly, "No hurry, no hurry. It is not time yet. Only we know the news now. It will take an hour or so for the steward to find everyone." Yuan Dai had a fiery temper and did not care so much. He dragged the two excitedly to the open space in the palace. As Bai Dong expected, when the three of them arrived, there were not many people who had received the news. There were only about 20 or 30 people scattered around, and most of them were disciples of the royal family and nobles. Among them, the most conspicuous was a valiant young man named Bai Tuesday. He was King Bai's nephew and Bai Dong's cousin. He was very good at archery. But this was not rare. What was rare was that he could use an empty bowstring to hurt people. In other words, even if there were no arrows, as long as there was a bow, he could shoot people to death. That was not all. It was said that Bai Tu had tried it in the palace. He could shoot 1,000 arrows in a day without eating or drinking, and each arrow could penetrate the city wall. This was very impressive. Even some cultivators who had entered the Tao just now did not have such an ability. And some people thought that perhaps the ability he possessed was not limited to what he showed. But when he saw Bai Dong come in, he was slightly unnatural. He even discreetly kept some distance from Bai Dong, apparently afraid that Bai Dong would see what he was thinking. He was not the only one. Almost everyone who knew Bai Dong's ability felt the same way. The place where Changzai and the other two were standing soon became empty. However, the three of them looked as if they were used to it. Needless to say, Yuan Dai and Bai Dong were the same. Although Changzai's strength was not conspicuous here, the iron-feathered mysterious hawk on his shoulder could tear tigers and leopards apart. About an hour later, the hundreds of children and youths in the immortal palace arrived one after another. After waiting for a while, 3 Taoists walked out. They modestly gestured to each other before one of them stepped forward. He looked at the children but didn't make his choice immediately. Instead, he asked the steward beside him, "I wonder if the steward has any recommendations?" The steward bowed and handed over a golden book. He said respectfully, "Immortal, they are all here." The Taoist took it and flipped through it. He already had an idea. He passed it to 2 of his peers and asked, "Which one is Bai Tu?" Bai Tu immediately stood up and bowed. "Exalted Immortal, this is the disciple." The Taoist looked at him with a happy expression. He said, "Very good, very good. Are you willing to be my disciple?" Bai Tu's aptitude was not bad. In the past, he thought that he would definitely be chosen. However, every time cultivators came, although they would praise him, none of them accepted him. Later on, he realized that cultivators did not only look at aptitude, but also fate. This was actually a disadvantage of individual cultivators. It was because the cultivation method they practiced was very simple. If a disciple did not match their cultivation method, there was not much use in accepting him. Instead, it would be a waste of resources. When Bai Tu heard that someone was willing to accept him, he was overjoyed. He said, "This disciple is willing." The Taoist smiled and said, "All right, stand behind me." Bai Tu acknowledged and stood behind the Taoist obediently. The Taoist looked very satisfied. He said to his two peers, "It's enough for me to accept this disciple. Next, it's up to the two Taoist brothers." When the children heard this, they were both envious and disappointed. According to the usual practice, immortals would usually only accept 1 or 2 disciples every time they came. Now that there were more than 100 people standing here, only 5 or 6 people might have a chance. Now that there was one less, they couldn't help but feel nervous. At that moment, another loose cultivator in gray robes came out. After taking a look, he chose Bai Dong. He was not in the mood to choose another one. The last loose cultivator chose Yuan Dai and another strong child. After that, he was about to leave. When Yuan Dai saw that the 2 of them had been chosen and only Chang Zai was not there, he couldn't help but feel anxious. He pointed with his finger and said, "Master, Chang Zai is also very powerful." The individual cultivator thought that he was reluctant to part with his companions. He caressed his head and said earnestly, "Disciple, you will know in the future that you are separated from the celestial world. Your companions are ultimately different from us." The Taoist took a look at Chang Zai and couldn't help but let out a sound of surprise. He found that Chang Zai's foundation was actually very good, which made him a little tempted. He couldn't help but want to take him in as a disciple. Although this child's cultivation method was not compatible with his, if the disciple's aptitude was really good, then these few flaws were nothing. However, after looking at him for a few more times, he found that there seemed to be a layer of fog around him that he couldn't see through. He thought about it and said, "What a pity, what a pity." The middle-aged individual cultivator asked curiously, "What did you see, Taoist brother?" The Taoist shook his head and said telepathically, "I really can't see through him. Maybe he has a background. It's not our fate." When the 2 individual cultivators heard this, their hearts trembled and they didn't ask anymore. In this world, there were some people with good foundation who were reincarnations of cultivators. This was not something that they could interfere with. However, it could also be their wrong judgment. However, as individual cultivators, the most important thing was to avoid conflicts with the sections. In the past, when cultivation was lacking in external objects, they had no choice but to fight for everything. They had to fight for disciples and external objects. Now that the Kunsher continent had all kinds of external objects and disciples to choose from, why should they do such a thing? The 3 of them didn't say anything more and left with their disciples. The children in the palace saw that there was no chance this time, so they also dispersed. Chang Zai walked out of the immortal palace alone, feeling a little disappointed. It wasn't because he wasn't chosen, but because 2 of his good friends had left and he was the only one left. The iron-feathered mysterious eagle seemed to feel its master's low mood and rubbed its head against his, as if to comfort him. He couldn't help but feel a little better. As he walked, he found that he had arrived at the abandoned palace before. He sat on the stone steps and took out half of the unfinished flatbread and ate it in small bites. At this moment, he suddenly felt his vision darken. He looked up and saw a middle-aged Taoist with phoenix eyes and a long beard standing in front of him. He hurriedly put away the flatbread and stood up. He bowed with the etiquette taught by the immortal palace and said, "Greetings, Taoist brother." The middle-aged Taoist looked at him a few times and solemnly bowed back, saying, "We haven't seen each other for many years." Greetings, Taoist brother. Chapter 2008. In Chang Zai's impression, most of these immortals had their eyes on the top of their heads. Now that this person in front of him was so polite to him, he was at a loss for what to do. The middle-aged Taoist sighed. We were close friends in our previous lives, so I've come to take a look in this life. Chang Zai didn't understand what he was talking about, but he felt that this Taoist was very close. Thinking about the matter of the immortal palace, he raised his small face and clenched his fists, asking expectantly, "Is Taoist here to accept me as a disciple?" The middle-aged Taoist sighed. How would I dare to teach fellow Taoist? However, here is a technique that was passed down by fellow Taoist's master. I'll pass it on to fellow Taoist now. He reached out to touch the space between Chang Zai's brows, and the latter found that there was something extra in his mind, and he fell into a half-asleep state. When Chang Zai woke up again, he found that the sky had already turned dark, and that Taoist was nowhere to be seen. There were rules for entering and leaving the immortal palace every day, and if he didn't go back now, he would be late. He exclaimed and hurried back. Shentong stood there and watched Chang Zai's figure gradually disappear into the distance. Then, he turned around and bowed to a place where no one was, saying, "Greetings, sect leader Wei." Wei Zihong's sleeves fluttered, and he walked out of nothingness, saying, "Sect leader Shen, you're here too." Shentong said, "Fellow Taoist Han and I hit it off very well back then. This time, he reincarnated and has a chance of entering Tao, but there were some twists and turns along the way, so I came to protect him. But I think I've been meddlesome." Wei Zihong smiled and said, "What are you talking about?" Back then, Sect Master Shen also cultivated under Master's tutelage and is a good friend of Junior Martial Brother Han, so you can be considered as one of us. Moreover, as a Sect Master, fellow Taoist has personally come to protect us, so I must thank you. Shentong said in a low voice, "Sect Master Wei, I think that fellow Taoist Han's aptitude is not bad, it's just that he lacks a Tao heart. If he were to start over again in this life, if we don't bring him back first and let him experience the mortal world instead, perhaps it would be a good thing for him." He paused for a moment before continuing, "Speaking of which, I am not a disciple of Zhao Yu sect. I hope that Sect Master Wei will not take offense to my rash words." Wei Zihong sighed, "Sect leader Shen's words are a testament to our friendship. How could I take offense?" Actually, even though he'd come under Zhang Yan's orders this time, it wasn't for the sake of taking this junior brother's reincarnated body back, and it was instead to take care of this junior brother so that he wouldn't lose his life. He understood the meaning behind this, and it was to use the matters of the mortal world to temper his heart so that he wouldn't repeat the mistakes of his previous life. In the capital city of the Bai Kingdom, the king of the Bai Kingdom had a dream. He heard a voice that sounded like a woman's laughter, but it was not someone he was familiar with. He felt that it was strange. He looked around and realized that there were no guards around him. He called out a few times, but no one came. He took his bow and arrow and followed the voice. Not long after, he arrived at the backyard and saw a strange monster that looked like a deer and a cow playing among the flowers and grasses. It was also eating the strange flowers and grasses around it. When he saw it, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He took his bow and arrow and shot. The monster jumped and dodged the arrow. Just now, he realized that there was a small person standing on the back of the beast. The person took the slingshot and shot at him, hitting him right on the forehead. The king of the Bai Kingdom let out a cry and sat up, only to realize that it was just a dream. He felt an unbearable pain on his forehead, and immediately asked someone to bring a bronze mirror to look at it, only to find a red spot there. He was also bewildered and immediately set off to the temple to worship, but the Divine Lord didn't respond at all. This made him even more uneasy, and he had to find many priests to interpret the dream. Some priests thought that it was a warning from the heavens to the monarch. The monarch had done something disrespectful to his subjects and the heavens, but this was only a small offense, so they sent celestial envoys to enter the dream to warn him. Another priest said that there was a villain who had ruined the country, and that the monarch needed to examine himself, so that he could stay close to the virtuous people and stay away from the villains. However, there were also priests who thought that the birth of a strange beast in the backyard was an auspicious sign for the country, and that there was no need to worry about it. In short, there were many opinions, but none of them satisfied the king of the Bai Kingdom. At this time, someone came and suggested, "My lord, in the celestial palace, there is a child named Egon. He can distinguish good and bad, and can interpret dreams. Why don't we ask him to come and see us?" When the king of the Bai Kingdom heard this, he immediately ordered someone to find the child and asked about it. Egon was still shivering at first, but when he asked about the dream interpretation, his eyes turned black, and his pupils disappeared. It was as if he had suddenly turned into a different person. With a deep and hoarse voice, he said, "This thing is called the deer of the morning cry, also known as the dream eater. It feeds on the dreams of the rich, and when it is full, it will naturally retreat without any hindrance. However, if someone is disrespectful to it, or tries to harm it, it will start to devour the memory of the person after eating the dream, and that person will no longer remember anyone around him or even his own name." The king of the Bai Kingdom was shocked. He had used a bow to shoot the deer, and it was obvious that he had offended the strange beast. He hurriedly asked, "Is there any way to solve it?" Egon said, "My lord is a marquis, and your dreams are abundant. It will take about 30 days to finish eating. As long as you can find the deer of the morning cry within 30 days, or kill it, or drive it away, then you will be fine." The king of the Bai Kingdom asked again, "Then can I ask the divine monarch to protect me?" Egon said, "The deer of the morning cry is a strange beast reared by an immortal from overseas. I am afraid that the divine monarch is unable to control it." The king of the Bai Kingdom was also enlightened. No wonder when he went to the temple to worship, there was no response. He said, "Then can it be that I need to ask the immortal for help?" Egon said, "My lord, do you remember the little person on the back of the deer of the morning cry?" The king of the Bai Kingdom said, "Of course I remember." He subconsciously touched his forehead. Speaking of which, he was injured by the little person's slingshot. Egon said, "The little person riding on the back of the deer is a hint from the heavens that you can use it to subdue the strange beast. However, if you don't use it well, it may be disadvantageous to my lord." The king of the Bai Kingdom frowned. Little person. Little person. He thought again. Wasn't this Egon a little person? He said, "Can you subdue the dream beast?" Egon shook his head. "I can't, but there is someone who can." "Who is that person?" Egon said, "That person's name is Chang Zai." The king of the Bai Kingdom had never heard of this name. He looked to his left and right, and the manager of the immortal palace said, "This is also the Jean-bearer of the palace. This child is famous for his ability to control beasts and birds." Controlling beasts and birds? Then he can control the dream eater. The king of the Bai Kingdom's expression darkened. He immediately ordered, "Pass my order, bring this child here and order him to find the dream eater. If he succeeds, I will reward him greatly. If he fails, he will be thrown into the river and his entire clan will be reduced to slaves." 4 hours later, Chang Zai was brought outside the king's hall. The manager of the immortal palace first comforted him for a while, then said, "Chang Zai, if you can find that strange beast, His Majesty will reward you handsomely. If you can't find it, he will punish you and your parents." Chang Zai was afraid, but he had to act according to the order. He had an ability. As long as he thought of a certain kind of bird or beast in his mind, even if he had never seen it before, he could summon it. Not long after, he heard a cry, and the figure of the dream-eater beast appeared in his mind. He knew that he had found the master. Just as he was about to call it out, he saw that the beast was crying non-stop. He was a little curious, so he asked with his mind. Immediately, he knew the cause and effect of the matter. He couldn't bear it, but if it was only his matter, he would let it go. But his parents would also be implicated, so he had to do this. At this time, he suddenly thought of an idea and found the manager of the immortal palace and made a request. The manager of the immortal palace declined to comment and told him to wait where he was. He then came to the front of the king of the Bai Kingdom and said, "My lord, that child has found the Chao Ming deer. He said he can summon it by himself, but he begs my lord to release the strange beast. He can persuade the beast to retreat. The king of the Bai kingdom was very dissatisfied. He said unhappily, a mere boy holding a cup dares to talk terms with me. The manager of the immortal palace said, my lord, I think we can do this. He came up and whispered a few words. The king of the Bai kingdom said, very well, let's do this. The manager of the immortal palace returned to where Chang Zai was and said, my lord has agreed. As long as you let the Dream Eater beast appear in front of the monarch, kneel and admit its mistake, and promise never to come again, you will let it go. Chang Zai was very happy to hear this and closed his eyes. After a while, when he opened them again, the Dream Eater beast had appeared in front of him out of thin air. The manager of the immortal palace was shocked, but his expression didn't change. He said, come with me. Chang Zai followed him into the throne room. The king of the Bai kingdom looked at the Chao Ming deer and said, are you willing to admit your mistake? The Chao Ming deer let out a cry and knelt down. The king of the Bai kingdom acted as if he didn't see it and asked again, are you willing to admit your mistake? Chang Zai wanted to say that the Chao Ming deer couldn't speak, but was stopped by the manager of the immortal palace. The king of the Bai kingdom had already asked for the third time. Immediately, an official came out and said, this beast refuses to admit its mistake. I beg my lord to order it to be slaughtered. The king of the Bai kingdom said expressionlessly, granted. There was a prohibition set up by the rogue cultivators in the hall, so there was no fear that the Chao Ming deer would escape again. Immediately, an attendant came forward and hacked the beast to death. Chang Zai had never thought that this would be the result. He was stunned for a moment and then became angry. As if sensing his thoughts, the iron-feathered mysterious eagle on his shoulder flew up. However, before it could reach a high altitude, an arrow shot out like lightning and pierced through its body. It fell down with a wail. On the stairs, a guard in golden armor put down his bow and arrow without any expression. Chang Zai was still a child after all. Seeing this, he rushed forward with a cry and held up the eagle with tears all over his face. He found that the once powerful wings had become extremely weak. The manager of the immortal palace asked, my lord, what should we do with this child? The king of the Bai kingdom hesitated and said, lock him up first. Although he didn't like Chang Zai, he didn't know if he would encounter such a thing in the future. Maybe this child would be useful then. Chang Zai was immediately taken away by the attendant and imprisoned in a small stone room. He wiped his tears and sat there hugging his knees, sobbing from time to time. His little face was full of regret. After a long time, he heard a sigh and found that the middle-aged Taoist he saw during the day was standing in front of him again. He stood up at once and wiped away his tears, saying, Taoist, why are you here? Shindong looked at him and said, do you know what you did wrong this time? Chang Zai thought about it and lowered his head, saying, I shouldn't have believed the manager and my lord's words. Shindong said in a low voice, no, your mistake is that you're just a boy holding a cup, but you want to reason with the emperor. He spoke slowly as if he wanted to imprint these words into Chang Zai's heart. In this world, power comes before reason. You're just a child without power or influence. Even if I bully you, what can you do? If you're the ruler of a country with millions of subjects behind you, then the king of the Bai kingdom will treat your words seriously. If you're a divine monarch or someone who has entered the Tao, then the king of the Bai kingdom won't dare to go against your wishes. In the end, it's because you're weak. If you're strong enough, you can move heaven and earth with a word and shock ghosts and gods with a word. Chapter 2009. After Chang Zai heard this, he felt a surge of qi in his chest, as if it was about to burst out. He asked, Taoist, what should I do? Shindong said, fellow Taoist, you will naturally gain something from cultivating that technique. What he taught was the clear qi scripture. Most Taoist disciples in the world use this method to cultivate before opening their meridians. Even Qinsang school was no exception. It looked shallow on the surface, but it was the best for entering Tao. Zhang Yan did not make any changes to it even after reaching his current realm. Chang Zai said seriously, I will listen to Taoist. Shindong looked at him and nodded slowly. Fellow Taoist, you must remember that cultivating Tao is to cultivate the heart. If you do not have the heart to improve, then it is useless no matter how much you cultivate. Although this is a prison, it can block out external disturbances and calm your heart. The day you succeed is the day you will leave. After he finished speaking, he disappeared just as he had come. After he left, Chang Zai tried to cultivate in the prison. His aptitude was good, after all. After a day, he gradually gained a sense of qi. However, he was more hardworking than Shindong had imagined. Although he did not really understand Shindong's words, he understood one thing. Chao Minglu was like him. If Bai Wang could kill the deer today, then he might be able to kill him tomorrow. This gave him a strong sense of fear and an urgent need for power. Shindong came out of the palace and turned around, arriving in the abandoned palace. Wei Zihong was standing there. He said, Fellow Taoist, you have deviated from junior brother Han's nature by doing this. Shindong said in a low voice, rather than letting fellow Taoist Han reincarnate again, it is better to let him succeed in this life. Sect leader Wei did not come out to stop me, so you must have the same opinion. Wei Zihong looked at him and nodded. He said, Sect leader Shen is right. Now that the fellow disciples have returned to master's seat, as the senior brother, I naturally do not want to see junior brother Han rolling in the mud of the mortal world again. In reality, the things that he had encountered were the tempering that he should have received in this life. However, whether he would choose to submit or resist was not fixed. Perhaps he would choose the former, or perhaps he would choose the latter. However, after Shindong said those words, he was forced to rise up and fight back. But this was what he wanted to see. That day, when he was questioning Zhang Yan in the Qinghuan Palace, he had faintly sensed that his teacher seemed to be making some kind of preparation. Based on past situations, this undoubtedly meant that a great enemy was about to arrive. He guessed that the entire Bushu heaven might not be stable, so he hoped that he would be able to help his teachers and fellow disciples when the time came. He had once calculated that if Han Zuoqing stepped into the Tao in this life, then he would have a high chance of reaching the upper level. However, if he missed this chance, or if he didn't fight for it due to his own Tao heart, then who knew how many lives he would have to wait before he would have a chance again. At the very least, he couldn't calculate it. As the senior brother, he didn't want to see such an outcome, so he thought of a way to help Han Zuoqing. After King Bai ordered Chang Zai to be locked up, he did not say what to do with him, but he quickly put the matter to the back of his mind. It was just a child from the Celestial Palace, not worthy of his consideration. In the blink of an eye, 6 years had passed. On this day, King Bai was commenting on the bamboo slips when an attendant hurried in and reported, My lord, the 2 young masters Bai Tu and Bai Dong have returned. King Bai's expression tightened and asked, How did they return? The attendant said, My lord, I heard that the 2 celestial masters released the 2 young masters to come back to visit their relatives. King Bai was overjoyed. For a sect, be it a monarch or a commoner, it was all the same. Once you entered the sect, you would be a disciple. Whether you had any connection with the mortal world was not in their eyes. But it was different for a wandering cultivator. Because their cultivation was usually not high, they needed a country to support them, to help them collect external objects, to provide services, and to save a lot of time for cultivation. So they would return the favor and take care of the country, mutually benefiting from each other. What King Bai hoped most was that the descendants of the royal family could be apprenticed to a Taoist cultivator and influence the sect behind them. Unfortunately, his wish had never been fulfilled. In the past, there were many who were taken in for cultivation, but after a few years, they were driven back again, saying that they could not pass the meridian barrier and could not enter the path of immortality, so they could only return to be immortal. Although these people had some ability, they could not be compared to a true Taoist cultivator. Otherwise, he could have asked a wandering cultivator to come and solve the problem of Chao Minglu. And the current situation was clearly great news. In his joy, he threw the brush in his hand and said, The prosperity of my Bai kingdom is right in front of me. He thought for a moment and said, summoned by two to the orchid garden, I have something to ask him. The attendant said, My lord, where is the second young master? King Bai frowned and said, Let him stay here, there is no need to see me. But if he wants anything, don't be short of it. This son of his could see through people's hearts, he must be even more powerful now, so it was better not to meet him face to face. After Bai Dong came back, he stayed in his original residence for the night. Not long after, a palace attendant came to announce a reward. After he accepted the reward, he asked, May I ask, attendant, when can I go and pay my respects to my father? The palace attendant said awkwardly, His Majesty said that it is rare for you to come back, so let young master rest well. If there is anything lacking, just let me know and everything will be prepared for young master. Bai Dong snorted and said, It seems that my father still does not want to see me. The palace attendant smiled bitterly and said, Young master, His Majesty also has his own difficulties. Bai Dong sighed and said, I know, I won't go and be disliked. He thought for a moment and said, By the way, does attendant leader know of a person in the immortal palace called Chang Zai? The palace attendant's expression changed slightly and he lowered his head and said, I do not know. Bai Dong was just asking casually. The Imperial Hall and the Immortal Palace had nothing to do with each other, how could a palace attendant know about the Immortal Palace? He waved his hand and said, Attendant leader, please go back. The palace attendant was relieved, bowed and retreated. But after returning, he immediately asked someone to secretly send this news to the Immortal Palace's management office. After Bai Dong rested for a night in his residence, he went to the Immortal Palace the next day to look for Chang Zai, but the news he received was that Chang Zai had returned to his hometown not long after they left 6 years ago. He asked Chang Zai where his hometown was and tried to find it, but after searching for it, he could not find any old records. But at this time, an Immortal Palace attendant came and secretly told him all the truth. After Bai Dong heard it, he was furious. He really treated Chang Zai as a good friend, but he did not expect that Chang Zai would be treated so unfairly after helping King Bai. He said, I want to see my father and ask him to release Chang Zai. The palace attendant turned pale and said, Young master, His Majesty does not want to see you. It is a serious crime to disobey the emperor's order. He came to report this matter in order to make a connection with Bai Dong, the future immortal. He did not want to see him fail and die before he succeeded. Bai Dong sneered and said, Then let my father chop off my head. He was now a Taoist cultivator, so King Bai could not do anything to him. At most, it would worsen the relationship between father and son. But he did not care about this. Since he was 4 years old, he had not seen his father again. At this moment, Shen Dong was standing in the palace, watching Bai Dong walk out angrily. Although there were many guards on both sides, no one could see him. From the perspective of Chang Zai's fate, there was originally this tribulation, and in the end, it fell into the hands of Bai Dong. Next, it was to follow Chang Zai out and find his own opportunity. But if he went according to the original fate, he might not be able to achieve the expectations of Wei Zihong and him, so he had to find a way to intervene here. Chang Zai wanted to go out, but he also needed to achieve a certain level of cultivation, and now he was at a critical juncture. After a period of time, when he came out, he could directly try to open his meridians, which would be one step faster than the original fate. But doing so would undoubtedly cause Chang Zai to suffer more, but this was also Shen Dong's purpose. In his opinion, if he did not do so, it would not be enough to polish his Taoist heart in this life. Bai Dong walked outside and suddenly saw a young cultivator standing there. He said in surprise, Senior brother, why are you here? The young cultivator came up and grabbed him, dragging him outside. He said, Junior brother, Master has opened a furnace of medicinal pills. Both of us are blessed. Quickly follow me back, or it will not be good if we miss the time. Bai Dong was shocked, Senior brother, but, no buts. The young cultivator interrupted him and said seriously, Junior brother, let me give you a word of advice. Don't pay too much attention to the matters of the mortal world. Let me ask you, after 100 years, how many people can you know? And how many can be friends with you? Bai Dong hesitated. Senior brother, I know what you said, but if I don't do this, my heart will not be at ease. Without waiting for the young cultivator to speak, he sighed, I only left a letter. Regardless of whether it succeeds or not, I just want to do my best. The young cultivator thought for a moment, then let go of his hand and said, Junior brother, go quickly, I will wait for you here. Half an hour later, King Bai received the letter from Bai Dong. After reading it, he said angrily, why should a child like you meddle in my affairs? With a sullen face, he called for his attendant and asked, how is my son Chang Zai? The attendant was stunned for a moment before he remembered who King Bai was asking about. He quickly said, reporting to your majesty, Chang Zai has been imprisoned in the stone chamber for the past few years and has not been released. Does your majesty want to see him? King Bai wanted to take his life, but he was afraid that his son would really turn against him. At this time, Bai Tu was at the side. With a glance at the letter, he could almost guess the reason. He could not help but be moved. He knew Chang Zai's ability, and he might be of some use to his sect. He said, if your majesty does not like Chang Zai, why not let me take him away? King Bai frowned, what do you mean? Bai Tu said with a smile, teacher has something to do recently, and it just so happens that he is lacking a beast tamer. Since Chang Zai is good at this, why not let me take care of him? It can be considered as doing his best. Even if Brother Dong comes back in the future, he will not blame it on your majesty. When King Bai heard this, although he felt that it was inappropriate to keep Chang Zai, since this was Bai Tu's suggestion, and it also involved the immortal master behind him, he could not refuse. He said, as you say. Chapter 2010. There was still some time before Bai Tu returned to visit his family, so he was not in a hurry to release Chang Zai. After staying for a month or so, he was finally ready to set off. Only then did he instruct his subordinates to bring Chang Zai out. In the cave manor, Chang Zai sat cross-legged. Even though he was only a little over 10 years old, he looked like a 15 or 16-year-old youth. At this moment, he was doing breathing exercises every day, but recently, he felt that his aura was filling up, as if he had reached a bottleneck that he could not break through. Staying here for 6 years, isolated from the world, had honed his patience. Now that he encountered a difficulty, he was not distressed, but rather eager to try. Based on his previous experience, once he broke through, there would be a huge improvement in his cultivation. Just as he was about to think of a way to overcome this obstacle, a figure flashed in front of him, and Shindong appeared before him again. Chang Zai immediately stood up and said happily, Taoist, you're here. I have a question here to ask. Shindong said, you don't have to cultivate these few days. Chang Zai was shocked and said, Taoist, why is that? Shindong said, your cultivation is filling up, and you can open your meridians. In a few days, you can go out. Under his push, Han Zhuqiang was already on a different path, but how he would continue was up to him. Open my meridians? Chang Zai was confused at first, then he said with surprise, I can go out. Shindong first explained what opening meridians was, then said, the person who will pick you up will be here in a while. Just wait. Hearing his confirmation, Chang Zai could not help but jump on the spot. In these 6 years, Shindong had come many times, mainly to give him pointers on the difficult problems he faced in cultivation. He had also given him many books that increased his knowledge, but he had never mentioned rescuing him. Now that he heard this, he almost could not help but cheer. After all, no one wanted to stay in a place where there was no daylight. Shindong handed over a hair band and said, take this. Everything you can use after you go out is in here. When you need to use it, just take it off and inject inner qi into it. Chang Zai took it and tugged at it, then grabbed the hair and tied it up casually. Shintong said, your vital energy is complete now. If you go out, you'll definitely be noticed by others. I'll help you conceal it. As he spoke, he started to chant a technique. Chang Zai listened attentively at first, but after a while, he felt abnormally sleepy and drowsy. In the end, he couldn't hold on any longer and laid down to sleep. When he woke up, he found that the light was a little dazzling and his lower body was a little bumpy. However, there seemed to be something cool and comfortable on his eyelids. It was very comfortable. After blinking a little, he got used to it. He touched the back of his head and saw that the ribbon was still there. He relaxed. He sat up and looked around. He realized that he was lying in a spacious carriage. Not far from him, there was a maid who was dozing off. She raised her head and saw that he had woken up. She said happily, "Lang Jun, you're awake." Before Chang Zai could say anything, the maid went out again. After a while, she came back with a bowl of fragrant hot porridge. Before a cultivator has opened his meridians, the acquired essence of the grains was still very important. When Chang Zai was imprisoned, King Bai did not tell him how to deal with him, and his subordinates did not want to starve him to death. However, he did not expect to eat anything good either. Most of the food was coarse grains that were difficult to swallow. Apart from that, there was also the bitter pill that Shindong often gave him. Now, looking at the thick yellow rice porridge mixed with finely minced meat, the fragrance of the meat went straight to his nose, and he could not help swallowing his saliva. The maidservant chuckled and said, "Lang Jun has been imprisoned in the stone room for 6 years, and his body is weak. Please eat some meat porridge to nourish your body." She then put down the bowl and said, "Lang Jun, please enjoy." She bowed and left. The moment Chang Zai saw her go out, he couldn't wait to pick up the bowl and gulp down the food with a porcelain spoon. After finishing the bowl, he became even hungrier. He had wanted to add a few more bowls, but when he called the maidservant in, she adamantly refused, saying that his body was still weak and he couldn't eat too much. He was helpless as well. Fortunately, he'd been imprisoned for 6 years, and his endurance had become much stronger. He forcefully suppressed his hunger and asked, "Where are we going?" "Let me answer this question, Lang Jun Chang." With this voice, a young man with a beard lifted the curtain and walked in. He said, "Lang Jun Chang, do you still recognize me?" Chang Zai looked at him and said, "Master Bai." Bai Tu laughed and said, "It's me." He waved his hand and ordered the maid to leave. He then rolled up his sleeves and sat in front of Chang Zai. "You disobeyed His Majesty's will and let the eagles do evil in the palace. Originally, His Majesty wanted to imprison you for life, but this time I came back to visit my family. After hearing about this matter, I took pity on your ability and pleaded in front of His Majesty, so you were released." Chang Zai was surprised and said, "So it was Master Bai who saved me?" Bai Tu said, "Yes, but I don't expect you to thank me for saving you. I just want you to do something for me." "What is it?" Bai Tu smiled and said, "There's no rush. We'll talk after I see teacher." He looked at him again and said, "I see that your body is weak, so I'll teach you a set of breathing techniques. After you practice it, you'll know the benefits." He took out a book from his sleeve and placed it on the table. He tapped it with his finger and then stood up to leave. Chang Zai picked it up and took a look, but his mouth twitched. This was a cultivation of qi, but it was far from the clear qi scripture. He took a few glances and threw it to the side. He touched his belt and poured a bit of inner qi into it. He felt that he could see another place that was not in front of him. After a brief inspection, he found that there were all kinds of external medicine for opening meridians. He just had to find an opportunity to open his meridians and break through, but now was not the time. After traveling for a month, the carriage stopped in front of a peak. Chang Zai then followed Bai Tu up the mountain and came to a Taoist temple with cedar trees planted in front of it. Bai Tu was the first to enter. After a long time, he was called in. He saw the Taoist who had come to the Immortal Palace to choose a disciple all those years ago. He understood quite a few things these past few days, and knew that this Taoist Shi was Bai Tu's teacher. Taoist Shi looked him up and down a few times. Although he had been imprisoned for a few years, he was still in good spirits and did not look dispirited at all. Other than his slightly pale skin, he had delicate features. She nodded and said, "You are a talented young man. Bai Tu did not misjudge you." Chang Zai said, "Thank you for your praise, Taoist. Taoist Chi chuckled and said, Bai Tu said that you are good at controlling birds and beasts. Can you control a serpent-scaled sparrow? Chang Zai said, reporting to Taoist Immortal, as long as there is a serpent-scaled sparrow nearby, I can do it. Taoist Chi said, if I want you to use this bird to attack a herd of rubber oxen, can you do it? Chang Zai thought about it and said, this kind of sparrow is wild and unruly. If that's the case, I'm afraid I'll have to ride it myself. It's best if it's at night. Bai Tu suddenly interrupted and asked, why at night? Taoist Chi waved her hand and said, rubber oxen have weak eyesight at night and cannot see too many of their companions. They are not brave and are easily frightened. This suggestion is correct. Bai Tu bowed and said, teacher is wise. Taoist Chi said to Chang Zai in a gentle tone, recently, I need to deal with a herd of rubber oxen. If you do this well, I will bring you into Taoism. Chang Zai lowered his head and said, thank you, Taoist Zhang. Taoist Chi nodded and said, you may leave. Chang Zai immediately bowed and left with a Taoist child, remaining silent along the way. He was still young and had not experienced the affairs of the world. However, after being deceived by King Bai, he didn't dare to trust anyone easily. Moreover, after reading the various historical books and illusions that Shindong had given him, he was no longer a child who knew nothing. In the Immortal Palace, he knew that most of these Taoist immortals only had 2 disciples. It was impossible for them to have more. This promise was actually empty talk. In fact, he didn't care about this, but he was afraid of what was behind it. It was obvious that only a small profit was needed to make him serve him, but this Taoist immortal made such a promise that was impossible to fulfill. It was obvious that he had never considered fulfilling it. After thinking about it carefully, he felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't help but make up his mind that he had to find a way to escape from this place. In the following months, Taoist Chi never came to find him, as if she had forgotten about this matter. Until one night, when he was meditating, a Taoist child suddenly came to call for him. He knew that the matter had finally come. He slightly calmed his nervous emotions and tidied up a little before following the Taoist child out. Along the way to the front of the Taoist temple, he saw Taoist Shi, Bai Tu, and another youth standing on a flying boat. He was about to go forward and greet them when Taoist Chi waved her hand and said, time is pressing, so there's no need to stand on ceremony. Quickly come on up. Chang Zai quickly walked onto the flying boat. The flying boat immediately rose up into the sky. However, he had flown on an eagle before, so he didn't show any signs of panic. Along the way, Taoist Chi didn't speak, so everyone was silent. The atmosphere was very oppressive. Chang Zai had been imprisoned for 6 years and had long since been able to endure the loneliness, so he didn't feel uncomfortable at all. After flying for 2 hours, the flying boat slowly came to a stop. At this moment, Taoist Chi opened her eyes and looked over with some dignity. She said, Chang Zai, there's a dragon-scaled sparrow near you. You can try to call it over. Chang Zai said yes and called it in his heart. Not long after, he heard the sound of flapping wings. A spotted sparrow about 3 meters long flew over and circled around the flying boat. Taoist Chi nodded and said, not bad. You're indeed capable. Chang Zai said, Immortal Elder praises me too much. Taoist Chi pointed to a hazy valley in the distance and said, the herd of rubber oxen is right below. Go down and drive them away. That will be a great merit. Chang Zai said, yes, Immortal Elder. Taoist Chi slowed down her tone and said, my previous promise still stands. Go. Chang Zai went up the side of the boat and jumped out onto the back of the large sparrow. The large sparrow was very obedient. After circling once more, it flew in the direction of the valley. When Taoist Chi saw him go far away, she turned around and said to her 2 disciples, that spiritual milk only appears once in 1,000 years. Once you get it, you'll have hopes of ascending to the upper realm in the future. Bai Tu and the youth bowed and said, thank you, teacher, for your guidance. Taoist Shi said again, it's just that this item can reconstruct one's foundation and increase the aptitude of us Taoists. Countless itinerant cultivators covet it, so this matter must not be leaked. When that kid drives away the herd of rubber oxen, you know what to do. 2. I hope you won't care about our past friendship. Bai Tu said calmly, teacher, don't worry. I know the severity of the matter. Although he and Chang Zai were old acquaintances, for the sake of his own Tao path, he could only choose to apologize. Moreover, Chang Zai wasn't a Taoist cultivator. He was merely a commoner and ultimately couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as him. Using the life of a commoner to help him, whether it was from the standpoint of a noble young master or a Taoist cultivator, he felt that it was only natural. Chapter 2011. Chang Zai rode the serpent-scaled sparrow and circled above the herd of rubber oxen for a while. It looked like he was looking for an opportunity to attack, but at the moment, he was extremely nervous. Recently, he had become more and more convinced of his own judgment. There must be something here that was very important. Taoist Shi didn't want him to bring the secret back, so he had been looking for an opportunity to escape. Now that he was far away from the master and disciples, he knew that the opportunity had come. However, Taoist Shi was definitely watching him, and if he escaped on the serpent-scaled sparrow, it would be too obvious. He was afraid that once he moved, he would immediately be discovered. He didn't know what Taoist Shi's cultivation was, but it shouldn't be difficult for her to catch up to him. Fortunately, he had already known what he was going to do several months ago, so he had managed to summon many birds that could be used as mounts. At the moment, they were following him from afar, waiting for his summons. The rubber oxen below finally noticed the serpent-scaled sparrow circling in the sky. The appearance of their natural enemy immediately caused them to panic, and they began to rumble as they ran. Chang Zai immediately controlled the sparrow to dive down. At the same time, a spirit bird received his summons and immediately rushed over. With a leap, he landed on its back and ordered the serpent-scaled sparrow to continue chasing the rubber oxen. Meanwhile, he urged the spirit bird beneath him, and with the help of the smoke, he flew into the distance. Taoist Shi saw that the herd of rubber oxen was in chaos and knew that the matter had been accomplished. Even with his deep character, he still praised Chang Zai. He didn't think too much about Chang Zai. They were surrounded by the wilderness, and Chang Zai couldn't go anywhere without them. However, he was a person with keen senses. After waiting for a while, he couldn't help but frown when Chang Zai didn't return. The matter of the spiritual milk must not be leaked. Although the possibility was very small because Chang Zai didn't know what they were looking for, the other cultivators weren't stupid. Once someone learned about the general situation here through Chang Zai, they would probably immediately guess what they were doing here. Even if they didn't think of it, as long as they became suspicious, there would never be a day of peace here. He said with a sullen face, Bai Tu, I'll give you the flying boat. Go find Chang Zai. Don't say anything when you see him, just kill him immediately. Bai Tu was stunned. He had the same thoughts as Taoist Shi. Where could Chang Zai go? Moreover, he didn't know that they were going to take his life, so there was no reason for him to escape. However, he knew that he was the one who found them. If there was a problem, it would be his fault. He gritted his teeth and said, Yes, master. He took a few steps forward, flipped himself onto the flying boat, picked up the token, shook it, and soared into the air. He looked into the distance. Just now, there was no movement in the east and west. Only the north was covered by smoke and dust. Therefore, if Chang Zai wanted to escape, he could only pass through this place. He believed that as long as he chased in this direction, he would definitely find Chang Zai. He immediately shook the talisman and searched in that direction. Chang Zai was indeed flying towards the north. He didn't dare to leap too high and only flew close to the ground. He was worried that Taoist Shi would catch up to him, so he was very careful. Along the way, he changed his mount several times and finally landed in front of a cave. This was where the bird he was sitting on originally resided. It was on the cliff, but the path below was winding and led straight to the depths of the ground. In fact, this place was filled with such underground caves. He had used flying birds to explore the surroundings for several months before he found these places. Once inside, he immediately ran down. The complicated and winding underground path gave him an incomparably safe feeling. However, he also knew that if the other party really came looking for him, these probably wouldn't be enough to stop them. When he reached the deeper regions, there were flowing underground rivers everywhere. He found a narrow and waterless cave and squeezed in with great effort. He then untied his headband and found an invisibility talisman. He stuck it on his body, and his aura instantly disappeared. In reality, there was a set of formation flags in the headband, but as someone who had not opened his meridians, he had no way of using them. He could only use this method now. Baitu kept circling in the sky, searching back and forth, but he didn't find any traces of Chang Zai. He grew more and more frustrated. Chang Zai had only left not long ago. He didn't believe that he could have gone far in such a short time. He must have found a place to hide, but he just couldn't find him. At daybreak, he returned to his original place with a dejected expression. He lowered his head and said, "Master, disciple is useless. I didn't find Chang Zai's whereabouts. Please punish me, master." At this time, Taoist Shi had already taken advantage of the situation to obtain the spiritual milk. However, his good mood from before had completely vanished after this incident. He snorted and said, "Why would I punish you? If we can't find this child, once the news is leaked, there will be countless fellow Taoists who will come looking for us. At that time, us three will all lose our lives." Both Baitu and the other youth paled when they heard this. Taoist Shi pondered for a moment. This kid was prepared. I underestimated him. However, he definitely can't have gone far. He's most likely hiding somewhere. Wait for me to perform a divination and find his whereabouts. He immediately performed a divination, but just now, when he wanted to clearly divine Chang Zai's whereabouts, his expression changed. He realized that he actually couldn't find Chang Zai's whereabouts. If he forced it, then the price would be unimaginably great. This situation meant that Chang Zai was already a Taoist cultivator, so he couldn't perform divination. This result shocked and angered him. He knew that Baitu had passed on a breathing technique to Chang Zai, but this technique was very crude. It was impossible for him to cultivate anything decent in such a short amount of time. This undoubtedly meant that Chang Zai had already stepped onto the path of Tao before he had come to their side. Who had passed on this Taoist technique to him? Where was this person? Could it be that everything he had done had been seen? Or was he just bait? Thankfully, he didn't panic. After calmly thinking about it, he believed that Chang Zai had been imprisoned in the palace, so it was most likely that he had learned something at that time. Perhaps there was something in that stone room, or perhaps there was some expert hidden in the palace. Because Baitu had found Chang Zai on a whim, it didn't seem like it had been arranged beforehand. When he thought of this, he calmed down a lot. If he wanted to find a person's whereabouts, even if he couldn't divine it, there were still other methods. He ordered the youth beside him, "Go and find a few luo hounds." The youth acknowledged, and in a short while, he brought over a few small dogs with large heads, drooping ears, and flat noses. These spirit dogs could distinguish a person's aura, and they could cross mountains and rivers as if they were walking on flat ground. As long as they remembered a person's aura, they would never forget it. Although Chang Zai's own clothes had all been taken away by him, his aura still lingered around his residence. This was unavoidable. Unless a cultivator had reached the meridian opening stage and purposely restrained himself, there wouldn't be any traces left. The youth led the luo hounds around the area where Chang Zai had lived. The few spirit dogs twitched their noses, barked a few more times, and scurried out. Baitu and the youth were overjoyed and immediately followed. Chang Zai lay on the ground, wondering if he had left any flaws behind. However, he felt that he had overlooked something, but he couldn't think of what it was. After all, he was young and limited by his knowledge. It was already not bad for him to be able to do this, but he couldn't cover everything. After thinking about it, he felt that Daoist Shi wouldn't give up so easily. She must still be searching everywhere for him, so he couldn't leave this place yet. Since there was still time, he might as well open his meridians here first. This was an extremely dangerous choice. If a cultivator encountered an enemy while opening his meridians, it would undoubtedly be a suicidal move. However, he couldn't care less about this. If the other party really found his hiding place, he wouldn't be able to defend himself with his current level, so it wouldn't be too bad. He did what he thought of. He sat up and took out the external meridian opening medicine from his belt. Shindong had already told him what to do at this stage. Now that he was done, he just had to follow the prescribed order. After Bai Tu and the youth chased out, to prevent Chang Zai from really escaping, the youth patrolled in the sky on the flying boat while Bai Tu searched on the ground. However, they didn't find anything. Fortunately, these Luo hounds kept chasing in a certain direction and never stopped halfway, which meant that they hadn't lost their target. Not long after, all the Luo hounds stopped in front of a cliff and started barking at a cave above. Bai Tu stuck a body-lifting talisman on himself and climbed up. Soon, he arrived at the cave. He looked down a few times and found shallow footprints that extended deep into the cave. He couldn't help but exclaim in joy, "Found it." The Luo hounds also scurried in at this moment. Then, they started barking and chased down one of the tunnels. Bai Tu saw them and hurriedly followed. On the other side, Daoist Shi was reflecting. He had always been careful, so how could he have made such a mistake? In reality, as long as he left a trick on Chang Zai beforehand, he wouldn't have to patch up this mistake afterwards. Although this move was a bit like bullying, when it involved such a matter of life and death, why would he care about such things? No, that's not right. As he pondered deeply, he just now remembered that he seemed to have seen this child before, and he suspected that there was karma behind him, so he didn't touch him at that time. However, when he saw him just now, he actually didn't remember that scene at all, nor did he think that they were the same person. To cultivators, this kind of thing was logically impossible, so why was it like this? He suddenly thought of a possibility, and his expression changed involuntarily. He glanced outside. Regardless of whether things were as he guessed, it was definitely not right to stay here. He had to find a way to leave. Now that he had obtained the spiritual milk, there was no harm in changing disciples. If Bai Tu and Shi Yi were fine, then he could find them again in the future. With this thought in mind, he immediately leaped up and flew into the sky. Bai Tu followed the Luo hounds. No matter how complicated the underground passage was, it was nothing to him. Very soon, he arrived at a spacious underground hall. On the opposite stone platform, Chang Zai was sitting there in good condition. He was instantly overjoyed and shouted, "Chang Zai! I've finally found you. Let's see where else you can run to." At this moment, Chang Zai also saw him and stood up. He said, "Looks like I guessed right. You and your disciple really want to take my life." He looked at the Luo hounds again and said, "But you brought these little dogs in. Aren't you giving me more helpers?" Bai Tu's expression changed, and he felt that something was wrong. In the next moment, the Luo hounds in front of him turned around and bit at him. Chapter 2012. When Bai Tu saw the Luo hounds approaching, he couldn't help but dodge in panic. Fortunately, he was no longer an ordinary person, and his movements were also extremely fast. However, the robe on his body was torn apart, and when he saw this scene, he broke out in a cold sweat. These spirit hounds didn't look big, but they could tear apart metal and stone. If he was bitten, his limbs would definitely be crippled. Even if he had already entered the path of Tao, he had yet to open his meridians. At most, his strength was much greater than that of an ordinary person. He did not have much chance of winning against these spirit dogs, especially with what Chang Zai had said. It was hard to say if there was anything else in the surroundings. That's right, Chang Zai. When he thought of this, he immediately reacted. These spirit dogs were originally raised by him, but they had been bewitched by Chang Zai. As long as he got rid of the person, then the danger would be easily resolved. He quickly retreated a few steps, grabbed a handful of talismans from his bosom, and tossed them out. The bodies of the Luo hounds immediately became sluggish, as if they were bound by something, and their movements became much slower. These talismans were all body-restraining talismans. They were usually used to deal with ferocious beasts and wild demons in the mountains. The power of these talismans was not great, and could only trap the target for 8 to 9 breaths of time. Fortunately, this short moment was enough for him. Taking advantage of this gap, he took out several items from his robes and clenched them in his palm. With a shake of his hand, he threw them out. Several rays of white light shot towards the stage. As an itinerant disciple, he did not have any talisman to defeat the enemy. Daoist Shi only had a few talismans that had been sacrificially refined by others. She had even used up a lot of her savings, so naturally she would not hand them over to her disciple. This was merely a flying locust stone that had been sacrificially refined. However, with his current strength of 500 kilograms, it was enough to shatter rocks and shatter gold. Chang Zai stood there without moving. When the flying locust stone was about 10 feet away from him, it seemed to hit an invisible barrier. With a crack, it shattered and scattered all over the ground. Now that he had successfully opened his meridians, he had already set up formation flags around him. Naturally, he was not afraid of these things. Bai Tu saw that the flying locust stone had no effect, and could not help but be shocked. Then, he suddenly thought of something, and panic and disbelief surfaced in his eyes. Could it be that you have already opened your meridians? Chang Zai had nothing to hide and said, "That's right." Originally, Bai Tu regarded Chang Zaishi as a mortal, and nobody who could take his life at any time. Who knew that in a twinkling of an eye, Chang Zaishi was above him, which made him really unacceptable. But no matter how unacceptable it was already a fact. He shivered, turned around, and ran. If he waited for those Luo hounds to break free, he might not be able to escape. He had already calculated that it would not be too late to deal with Chang Zai after he found his master. Even if the latter had opened his meridians, he would not be a match for the three of them. However, it was easy to come in, but difficult to leave. He realized that after running for a long time, he still couldn't get out. Even though he was following Luo Quan when he entered, he was a cultivator in the end, and he would absolutely not forget the paths he'd taken. Presently, this situation caused him to feel panic in his heart. But at this moment, he was unable to come up with any way to deal with it, so he could only brace himself and continue running. Chang Zai looked at Bai Tu, who was running around not far from him, but ultimately did not go far. He breathed a sigh of relief in his heart and thought to himself, "This array is indeed useful." At this moment, it was best to wait for Bai Tu to slowly exhaust his strength, but he was not sure if Daoist Shi would come, so he could only resolve this as soon as possible. He touched his belt and took out a golden arrow talisman. Similarly, he did not have any artifacts, so he could only rely on this to injure the enemy. In reality, the array flag had this ability, but just now, he had learned it and did not have much inner chi to control it. It was already not bad to be able to set it up, but it was impossible to use it to attack the enemy. He aimed the talisman at where Bai Tu was and threw it out, hitting him right in the back. Bai Tu cried out and fell forward. At this moment, the Luo hounds had also broken free from their restraints and came up to bite his limbs, instantly causing him to lose the ability to escape. Bai Tu turned pale with fright and shouted, "Spare me, Chang Zai, it was I who saved you. If it wasn't for me, you would still be suffering in the prison." Chang Zai frowned and said, "But it was also you who wanted to take my life just now." Bai Tu explained, "I didn't want to do this, but I was under Master's orders to capture you. Master's orders cannot be disobeyed. Besides, I didn't really want to take your life. As long as you let me go, I can still convince Master not to make things difficult for you." Chang Zai hesitated for a moment and then became determined. He said, "If I keep you, I'll be stupid. I'm sorry." He took out a soul-snatching talisman and aimed it at Bai Tuesday. After a few breaths, a beam of spiritual light shot out from it and dragged Bai Tu's spirit out of his body. It was unknown where he had taken it. Usually, those who had not opened their meridians were almost unable to resist this talisman. Bai Tu's head drooped, and his lifeless body sprawled weakly on the ground. Chang Zai stood in a daze for a moment. After a while, he suddenly remembered that Bai Tu still had a fellow disciple outside, so he used his heart to summon a sparrow outside to investigate. However, that youth was a clever person. Seeing that Bai Tu had not come out for a long time, he did not come down to look for him. Instead, he turned and left. This person did not enter the formation, so Chang Zai did not have the ability to do anything to him. Because he was afraid that Daoist Shi would catch up, he immediately left the crypt and rode away on the sparrow. At the same time, he sent a few spiritual birds to circle behind him. If there was any movement, they would immediately go down and set up a formation to hide. However, after a dozen days, he did not see Daoist Shi come over. Only then did he slightly relax. However, he was now at a loss. After leaving Bai country, where should he go? He had wanted to return to Mount Dijia, but on second thought, if he led Daoist Shi there, then he would probably implicate his parents. However, Shintong had long said that his parents would be taken care of, so it would be fine if he did not go. It was just that he missed them very much after not seeing them for a few years. Finally, after some thought, he summoned a bird over and wrote a letter. He used a roll of paper to tie it to the bird's leg and asked it to send it back. He watched the bird fly away, turned around, and walked towards the boundless mountains with the few Luo hounds. In the blink of an eye, another 6 years passed. On a cliff that faced the lake, there was a row of caves. Outside was a long and narrow stone platform that was protected by a row of red railings. Chang Zai wore a brown robe and sat in the stone room in the middle of the cave. A few days ago, he had already entered the mystic light realm, and his aura was bursting. Looking from afar, his body seemed to be covered in a layer of light. The belt that Shintong had given him only contained medicine for opening meridians, so in the past few years, all the external items he used were found by himself or exchanged with some wandering cultivators. Not only that, even what he wore and what he used daily was personally made by himself. Of course, he had spiritual birds and beasts to support him, and he had cultivation, so he did not have to work as hard as normal people. "Is Daoist Chang here?" A voice came from outside, and a cultivator with a round face and short eyebrows came in. He looked very smart, and when he saw Chang Zai's face, he was very surprised. He clasped his hands and said, "Oh, so Daoist Chang has entered the mystic light realm. Congratulations." However, Chang Zai said impatiently, "Daoist Ji Wei, your appearance is too fake." Ji Wei chuckled and said without any awkwardness from being exposed, "Not at all, not at all. I wonder if the feather robe that I want is ready." Chang Zai said, "The item that Daoist wants is already prepared." He stretched out his hand and took out a scarlet feathered robe from his belt. This item was crimson in color, and it was adorned with greenish-blue tassels. It was gorgeous and bright, and it had the ability to resist fire and water. He had weaved this item with the help of dozens of spiritual birds, and it took him a lot of effort to weave it. Ji Wei took the feather clothing and kneaded it a few times. He felt that it was very tough and couldn't help but say happily, "With this thing, Lady Ji will definitely be satisfied. I can then ask her for a precious bird to be my protector." After being happy for a long time, he patted his head and took out an item from his sleeve. "I used more than 100 days on the cliff to gather over 10,000 silver nest silk." Chang Zai quickly took it and was also very happy. He thought to himself, "With this, I can start refining a protective magic treasure in the next 2 days." Although he had reached the mystic light realm, he still did not have a protective magic treasure, so he had always wanted to refine one. The other things were already prepared, but he was missing these silver threads. Now, he had finally gathered all of them. These years, because of Daoist Shi, he did not dare to return home and could only communicate by letter. Once the magic treasure was refined, he would no longer have to fear this person. Also, King Bai had imprisoned him for 6 years, so it was time to settle this score. After sending Ji Wei off, He closed the cave dwelling, set up the formation flags, and couldn't wait to return to the inner room to refine the magic treasure. 2 months later, there was a clear sound in the cave dwelling, and then a mysterious light rushed out and flew in the direction of the Bai country. Qinghuan Palace in Xianyuan Heaven. In the main hall, Wei Zihong was reporting Chang Zai's recent situation to his teacher. In the end, he said, "Teacher, junior martial brother Hans will in this life is very strong. Junior martial brother Shen and I deliberately left a big enemy for him, but it forced him to improve very quickly. Disciple thinks that junior martial brother Han is a rare seed to seek the Tao. We might as well wait for him to achieve great success and cut off his mortal body before opening his knowledge." Unlike the Wang sisters, Han Zuoqing had cultivated to the Yuanying realm under the supervision of his teacher and fellow disciples in his previous life. Just now, he did not have any desire to seek the Tao and only wanted to live a peaceful life. But in this life, he had suffered a lot before entering the Tao, so his desire to improve was much stronger. Wei Zihong was worried that if the memory of his previous life was restored, he might revert to his old ways. Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head. "What you all hope for is nothing more than for Zuoqing to become the person you all hope for, but you have never thought that if this is the case, he will no longer be himself. As a teacher, I certainly hope to see all of you succeed, but if Zuoqing still wishes to live a peaceful life, then there is nothing wrong with it. With me here, I will not break off the relationship between master and disciple." Wei Zihong bowed and said, "Teacher, this disciple has misunderstood." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How can I not understand your love for your fellow disciples? I am not a person who does not know how to be flexible. For us cultivators, the foundation is especially important. In the previous life, Zuoqing was already dispirited when he entered the Tao. Later on, even if he wanted to pull himself together, he would not be able to climb up. So this time, I ordered you to go to the lower realm to help him. When his cultivation is gradually successful, you can bring him to me."